Around 50 years ago, a Doctor Who story called Pyramids of Mars was broadcast. And it's remained pretty damn popular in the decades since. Would you two agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
So talking through Pyramids of Mars today, not just the actual 4-part serial itself, but also the 2024 Ben Cook revitalization, the Tales of the TARDIS version of it, also the Terrance Dicks novelisation of it, any other Pyramids of Mars-y thing to do with the serial itself we'll be talking through, but who are we? Neo from Australia, Ingiga from the UK, Tyler also from the UK. What's your guys' story with this serial? When did you first watch it? What do you think in general of it? What are your thoughts?
When I was a kid, I got into, when I was very young, I think, when I was maybe 5-ish years old, I got into a lot of Doctor Who through, my parents used to read The Sun. That's true, unfortunately. And in The Sun, you guys may know, there used to be Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who DVDs.
Oh, the little free disc things, yeah.
Yes, exactly, yes. There was a lot of, and Doctor Who being one of those. So I collected a lot of Doctor Who. Spearhead from Space, actually, was one of my first Doctor Who's as a result of that. That was great. But all of that is to say, this is one of the ones that I didn't see until I think I must have been 15 or 16 years old when I trawled through. Like I infosorbed really most of classic Doctor Who, which was a shame. And I've spoken I think on here previously about how that's something that I will rectify now that I'm sort of further into my 20s. But anyway, yeah. So the first time I watched this, I was about 15 or 16 years old, and at the time it kind of, because I was pushing my way through Doctor Who as quickly as I could, I was quite struck by this one and a few others around this era. We were just talking, weren't we, about how Doctor Who in this era in the 70s really kind of codifies a lot of what Doctor Who, exemplifies a lot of what Doctor Who is.
Totally, yeah.
And this one really is one of those. There's a lot of really iconic, so iconic shots and story ideas running through this. So I really love this one. Yeah.
What about you, Geek?
My story with it, I guess, early on in my, Doctor Who fandom, there was kind of my experience with Classic Who basically involved dipping into random DVDs, basically a handful of stories with really good reputations. So I wasn't really going in order, watching seasons properly at that point. So I would have been like very early, kind of not my 10s rather than my 20s, kind of that bit. And like stories like just ones that people were talking about, because I was getting into it in early Matt Smith era, and obviously there was lots of talk about stuff like Tomb, or, which isn't obviously that good in retrospect, but, it's one of those things that had a huge reputation around it. And Pyramids was actually, funny enough, I forgot I had this DVD until a few minutes ago when I looked on my shelf. I was like, oh my god, Pyramids is one of the DVDs, the first DVDs I got. So, I was kind of dipping into them, and my first reaction to it was that, like, this was really, kind of a quintessential classic story all the way through. And then the last episode was kind of like, okay, well, that was a bit anticlimactic. What's going on there? But the actual, the identity of it, like the Fourth Doctor, Sarah Jane, like their characters are superbly realised in this story. And I think there's just the basic creativity of how it takes the iconography of the Egyptology and all the stuff it's borrowed from kind of Hammer, Mummy, horror films and stuff, and basically uses that as a skin for something that is self-consciously and subversively this sci-fi, almost not so much hard sci-fi, but very concerned with mechanics, machines, like exothermic processes, building rockets, contraptions, robots, all of that. And it just really confidently does that like it's the most natural thing in the world. And it's just incredibly well realised, and it's just, it sticks out. It wasn't one of my favourites, but I think it's aged very well for me, retroactively.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty similar here. I think I first saw it, I think New Who had started. So probably the first Tennant era, I think I saw this. And yeah, I always really liked this one a lot as well. Revisited it this year because it's come in vogue again. And yeah, I was kind of blown away how good it is. Like, I always knew this was a good story, but it's like Gig saying, it's very holistic and cohesive. And it's one of those ones you go back to and you go, wow, this actually really worked. This wasn't just a good Doctor Who story. This was like legitimately good television, I think I would call it. And I had a little, because 2024, it's reignited this story, the Tales of the TARDIS thing mentioned earlier, other Russell T Davies things as well. I infazorbed, as Tyler said, as much as I could to do with pyramids. Like the day The Legend of Ruby Sunday aired, I had a long drive home. So I listened to the Tom Baker audiobook of the novelisation, the 3.5 hours of that or whatever on the way. And that was a nice experience. We'll talk about there's some interesting stuff in the novelisation we'll talk about later. It's one of those ones where there's a thing in the novel, not in the episodes. And I found myself arguing in defense of the episodes about something that I only later realized is not actually in the episodes and is in the novel. Have you ever had that? That's such a nerdy thing to say. Have you ever been defending something because you read the novelisation and that entered your head instead? Can you guys relate?
No.
I've won the geek off there. Absorbed lots of stuff. It's an interesting story. We'll get into a while later why it's one of those pseudonym ones. Stephen Harris does not exist. I mean, some men are called that, but there was no man called that wrote this episode. Who actually wrote this episode? We'll get into that a bit later. But it was, the big era of Bob Holmes, Peter Hinchcliffe. Season 12, Tom Baker's first season had been finished by now, and that was kind of I think of that as kind of a vestigial season. Like it's definitely, it's different from the Pertwee years, but it's still kind of a lot of classic monsters, and it's still working through, I think, a lot of remnants of the Pertwee years. Season 13 feels to me like new approach, uncluttered from the old approach. Hinchcliffe and Holmes are doing some interesting new stuff there. Really interesting season. Would you guys agree in general with how I'm characterizing it?
Yeah, season 13 is great, isn't it? It's definitely quite experimental. It takes a lot of all of the past elements of Doctor Who, what Doctor Who had previously been, and like I said earlier, kind of codifies them into this kind of becomes Doctor Who procedurally. Doctor Who has become to know it, but of course that it hadn't been done in this way before, so it's really interesting. Season 13.
Yeah, it's kind of a soft reinvention.
Yeah.
Whereas, like with the previous season, it's kind of like, okay, this is Doctor Who. With this one, they're pushing the boat out and actually going, we're going to actually build this new style.
Absolutely.
With these different, riffing on these different Gothic influences, but kind of fusing them, kind of synthesizing them together to create this new formulation that instantly becomes enshrined as how Doctor Who is done from here on out.
Gothic's the word, isn't it? I feel like Terror of the Zygons, which was like a leftover, but starts the season, and this one are so, like, season 12 has Daleks and Cybermen, and it's like it doesn't feel like a Pertwee season exactly, but it's doing a lot of what Doctor Who used to do. But I feel like even when we're using past things in season 13, it's in this very, like, how to describe this? It's kind of reflecting back. Like, it's really interesting that the Priory this episode mostly takes place on later becomes the unit headquarters for, like, the Pertwee era. That's interesting. That's something interesting is going on, and especially in Terror of the Zygons with how the Fourth Doctor interacts with the unit and that. It's kind of like the show it's dusting off its shoulders and kind of saying we're doing things differently now. It's not kind of disconnecting from the past, but it's reevaluating that relationship, which is, kind of the essence of Gothic, is that strange relationship with the past. I think that's really interesting, yeah. Yeah,
it's kind of being haunted by the unit stuff.
Yeah, that's the word.
But also in a way haunting it as well, because in this story we're going to the past of the building, and literally, the ghosts that haunt unit, I guess, is what we're revisiting now by going back to before the building was even created.
I want to get more into the Gothic Hinchcliffe stuff later, because he said a bunch of interesting stuff in that as well. But before we fall over ourselves with the genre stuff, what are just some of our favourite moments of this story? Like, what are parts we really like about it? Specific parts.
There are a few things. There are more than a few things. There are so many great things about this. One of them is that there's a really great shot, and it's scored really nicely, of the Doctor and Sarah skulking around outside the Priory in kind of the first act of the first part. I really love that. That's just a simple moments, but it's very kind of exemplary of what Doctor Who was doing in 1975-ish. And there's so much in part 4, all of part 4. Can I say that? Can I say all of part 4? It's brilliant. So brilliant. I love I'll talk a lot more about this later. But I love that two-hander between Gabriel Woolf and Tom Baker. So brilliant.
Oh yeah,
really great stuff. So the Doctor being possessed is maybe some of my favourite Tom Baker work.
I'd say there's lots of fantastic moments for, like, Sarah Jane and the Doctor in this story. They get off to a really great start. We open with that shot of the Doctor kind of brooding, raising his head slowly. For the first moment we see him in this story, it's just this really long shot kind of drawing back from him. And then we have Sarah come in wearing Victoria's dress. And one little moment I love there, is that when the Doctor mentions Victoria, usual haha continuity stuff, I love that Sarah Jane's reaction, rather than to be like, oh my god, there are companions before me, she just like immediately makes kind of a cultural quip, like it's Victoria for Queen Victoria, like I hope Albert didn't. So that's really fun. So I love that cheekiness and just that light touch with which they engage with this idea of like the history and the way that those characters kind of interact with each other. There's lots of great dialogue between them. Another fantastic moment, when, I think it's Scarman's brother is just in disbelief when Sarah's told him she's a time traveller, and he's like, that's preposterous. So it's just like, yes, sorry. And that's the end of that conversation. I laughed out loud at that. That's just, I think the willingness to treat the basic text of the show with not too much, but just the right amount of wit. I think it's self-aware, but not to a cloying degree. So it's capable of giving these characters some, a good sense of humour, but also it's able to add that spark to the script to keep the momentum going. It never becomes a self-cannibalizing sort of thing.
We've been so positive for like 10 minutes. I'm going to bring up a negative thing. In reading or listening to the novel, the mummies work for me because I'm not seeing how the TV show realized them in my head. In my head, I'm seeing like more skinnier mummies, basically. This sounds awful of me. I'm fat shaming the mummies. I'm seeing skinnier, creepier mummies in my head.
Do you mean like the Mummy on the Orient Express one in Series 8? More like that?
Yeah. Like the Foretold. That's how I see them in my head when I read the book or listen to the book. When I watch the actual episodes, the mummies, they have a really large, like, bust. And maybe you could ignore that if not for the fact that Ernie literally gets killed by being crushed between the chest of two mummies, which is one of the most absurd visuals in Doctor Who for me. Like, what? That's such a strange... Do you guys laugh at that? Or how do you react to that visual when the poor guy's killed by them crushing between their huge chests?
So insane, isn't it? I don't know how on earth you could justify two mummies hugging this guy between their bosoms to death. So insane. Who let that happen?
I kind of see what they were trying to go for with the mummies, because I think they're supposed to be physically imposing, like huge, I guess, like muscular, even though they're robots. Kind of these massive things, like in that. Like the engineer thing in Prometheus, there's that huge guy just walking around being all like Chadley and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like something like that in the vein of like, I guess it's evoking the idea that these like strong beings are kind of like mythological almost, but the way that they're actually physically realized, I guess because I guess with difficulties in actually making these costumes for these actors, they waddle around, they look kind of awkwardly misproportioned, and they don't have very imposing shoulders, they look kind of saggy, and the way they walk, like I mentioned, they waddle around rather than like stalking or striding, so they're just constantly like wiggling back and forth whenever they walk anywhere. They look stiff, they just look silly, I think it's the problem. So they look like ridiculous kind of, basically they don't look very threatening. I think that's why the kind of pointy bust stuff rather than looking like imposing, just makes them look like... It's because the busts become too prominent, the most prominent feature of their entire design. Whereas I think ideally they would just be part of the overall shape. And I think if you had like maybe more... I don't know, more resources or something like that, you could make a more like cohesive design for them overall that emphasizes their strength, rather than it all being in the polygon Lara Croft kind of chests. They're kind of like they just like intersecting people's necks there.
In one of the commentaries, Hinchcliffe says the mummies are basically just a version of the Cybermen, referring to how they're like robots.
Yes, the mummies, I suppose, they're a version of Cybermen, really, aren't they? They're
I think they're better than us.
Yes, but I mean...
And in a funny sort of way, more frightening.
Yeah, but for the young...
It's not just me.
For the young audience, they probably count as a monster, really.
What do you think of that? I was kind of thrown by him saying that.
I think maybe Cybermen kind of become a shorthand for robotic kind of enemies sometimes. I mean, especially if you're like working on Doctor Who, you have time to split hairs about what exactly are the Cybermen empirically. I mean, if you're making the show, they walk around, they look like robots. That's kind of how they feel, even if that's not actually what they are.
That was largely the purpose of the Cybermen, really, though, wasn't it? Beyond the 10th planet.
Most stories, yeah.
Yeah.
So besides the realization of the mummies, is there any other things we did not like in Pyramids of Mars, the original version?
I have a question about this. This could go up and down, like either way. How do you feel about the daytime shoots for all the woods stuff, like in the forest? Because you could complain about that it being not at nighttime or something like that. It's not what you usually get for that kind of sequence, is it? Being stalked around by the monster. The fact that it's in kind of really bright, broad daylight, I think the sequences are kind of pretty.
They are.
Actually, it does give them an odd kind of vibe. Like, it's not the usual vibe, but I think it's not necessarily that scary, I would say.
I agree. It's another one of those things where the tone feels different in the novel, where you can kind of, realize it in your head in a scary way. I like those sequences because I really like the outdoor filming for the first 3 episodes. But yeah, I guess the tone. Do you think the tone's off there, Tyler? What do you think?
I suppose so. I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it. Now I do think about it. It's interesting then that we end obviously with the Priory burning at night. Doctor and Sarah run away at night. So it kind of you get the feeling that the sequence of events kind of take place over the course of a day or an afternoon and evening. I think I wouldn't say tonally it's off. I do think I agree that it would make more sense. It would feel perhaps more appropriate. It would feel a bit more kind of Hammer horror-y if they were running around the woods at night. But I don't think I have anything to say really for or against day shoots on this.
You're just thinking about it again right now. I suppose, in a way, in doing it not quite with the lighting conditions or atmosphere that you'd expect if were a normal Hammer horror kind of thing, maybe that's part of what the story's doing overall, because it's not quite indulging the entire cliche Gothic horror vibe. It consciously changing that and making it about like all these slightly different things. It's saying, well, this is actually kind of a scientific plan that Sutekh is trying to execute and that the Doctor's trying to sabotage. We aren't actually fully in the world of the kind of paranoid Gothic horror. We're actually breaking out of that slightly. So maybe in a way, just doing it at a completely different lighting conditions and stuff like that kind of contributes a little way. Just making it the slightly off-kilter version of that expected story.
It's worth digging into the Hammer horror stuff a bit. So Hinchcliffe himself he says he hadn't seen any mummy movie by the time he did this story. So not Hammer or otherwise, he hadn't engaged with any of that sort of thing. He says he didn't go to the cinema that much anyway. But Robert Holmes was like an obsessive with that sort of thing. You can tell by so much of how he writes that he's, in so many ways, he's like Moffat, isn't he? He's absorbed so many things and they regurgitate in fascinating ways through his Robert Holmes is a very comedic, he's a very witty way of writing and way of thinking. So Robert Holmes has seen all sorts of movies. Britain during the 1970s, well, I guess it'd been a while. There's a reason Britain had gotten so into Egyptology and all that, from when they started plundering the tombs and everything like that. Well, the story was originally going to be set in the British Museum as well, but that would have been way too expensive to realize. Anyway, pulling from Hammer horror mummy films, there's some specific visual allusions and specific references that'll be lost on, I guess, Hinchcliffe and other people who haven't engaged with that sort of thing. Pulling from a lot of that, but the story isn't like a pastiche of The Mummy, like the old movie. It's not just like it's not exactly a riff on it. Hinchcliffe and Holmes are kind of doing a synthesis with it, where Hinchcliffe describes it as they kind of stumbled onto a formula that we've kind of talked around a bit already that really, really, really worked for the show. So much so that you go back and watch Pyramids of Mars and it feels like, it's one of those kinds of stories rather than this is kind of the progenitor of a certain type of Doctor Who story. So one of the important things about it is it's not just that we have like a sciencey thing in a present day setting or whatever, or it's not like we're putting a sci-fi element into another type of story. They've kind of put another layer of abstraction there because this isn't set in the 1970s. This isn't set in 1975 or a few years ahead, like a lot of the stories this era was set. This is set way back in the very early 20th century. So you've got Sarah is from decades and decades later, and she's being transported to this period, which ancient Egypt is like the period that's getting interfaced with. And then you have this secondary period, which also isn't when the story was broadcast. We've added like another layer of depth to there. Robert Holmes was apparently very bored of historicals in Doctor Who. He found them boring. He didn't like the educational kind of thing. That didn't work for him. Hinchcliffe thought it would be interesting to kind of bring in the alien or the supernatural element and then kind of do that secondary layering of time periods things. So that kind of, how would you describe these? Are like pseudo-historicals? New Who riffs on these all the time. That sort of thing, Hinchcliffe and Holmes really locked in together and they really like that sort of format. So you've got that kind of Gothic-y thing of regurgitating or remixing kind of a literary era or a period that one of them is interested in. Then you've got the secondary layering of the settings, and then you've got kind of Hinchcliffe's thing about the triumph of rationalism, the triumph of wit, the triumph of science over faith and that sort of thing. It's all kind of bubbling together really well. I think it works together. It works together so coherently that this is just like a type of Doctor Who story that will be used forevermore after this. But it did kind of have to be invented. This wasn't exactly something happening like in the Barry Letts era or earlier. What do you think of how I'm characterizing this kind of era of stories, this type of story that they've made up together, Hinchcliffe and Holmes?
I guess inherently in doing a historical set in a period where history itself is already a massive concern. So you're doing historical about historians in a way, or people who are interfacing with history. I guess it's kind of a consequence of doing a historical set, I guess, not that far back. So not like, 1066 or whatever, but in the 1900s. It's, going back less than a century. It becomes a kind of meta-historical in a way, and in focusing it on, by refracting that idea of how we engage with history back on itself, it becomes a kind of like meta-historical, sort of hyper-historical kind of thing. But also it's, like you say, it is actually more about going back to not so much the real history of 1911 as the, I guess, culturally remembered kind of version of it. So the sort of classic Curse of the Mummy kind of narratives that were already existing in culture. It's bringing those back rather than actually going back. So it's piloting the TARDIS into a genre a little bit rather than into a historical period per se. So it's history starting to become the symbol of itself rather than like a necessarily means to explore history itself.
Yeah.
It's strange, isn't it, that all of the Egyptian and Egyptology stuff could essentially have been shed from this script, and it kind of retained the same magic and occultism versus science and wit, kind of those opposing aesthetics. It's interesting that Egyptology remained. I suppose that comes from the original script. Neri mentioned that was set in the British Museum, wasn't it? I think it kind of comes from the Hinchcliffian pitting against each other of those two aesthetics within a script that was about ancient Egypt and gods. But it creates like an interesting, almost kind of mismatched, confused fusion of those things. I think by the time you get to part 4, it's quite unsure of itself, and we're talking about like IQ tests as passing through barriers and tribophysics, and so the science stuff eventually prevails, of course. I suppose the aesthetic value of Egypt and Egyptology for me in this story is not. I don't think it's appropriately realised. I think it is, as you say, it is kind of, as opposed to legitimate history, it's not legitimate historical, it's more, history, as genre. But I think that there are lots more interesting ways to explore, Egypt that weren't explored at all here. Ideas that were kind of littered throughout, but not explored.
This conscious choice around making Egypt and Egyptian mythology the basis for Sutekh and kind of the source of the great power in this story that the Doctor is so kind of talking up like a lot, or hyping up. This is the most dangerous thing I've ever faced. This is like the most powerful god. Not even the Time Lords can stop this guy. This is huge stakes in this story and limitless power. I think the choice of Egypt there, I think it has to do with the mystique that Egyptology had when it took off, because it was kind of about constructing the ancient Egyptians as like, the cradle of civilization, kind of, even as obviously Egypt, as it was at that time, was being, plundered, bombed, subject to unceasing savagery from its various successive administrations, French and British. The idea of the ancient Egypt as this different thing, I guess the imperial countries were kind of taking it upon themselves, like, we have to run this place, we have to be in charge of this place, because look at the ancient history. This is actually like this ancientness is actually a separate thing, and it's really important and profound, and it belongs to us. So in a way, that it kind of elevates, I guess, the culture and mythology there into something that has almost a certain implicit supremacy. So to just thinking about it, like, this story wouldn't quite work the same way if the villain was like necessarily like a Greek god per se, or like a Norse god. I think there's something specifically about almost the Orientalist romanticization of ancient Egypt that kind of contributes to how Sutekh and the Osirans are kind of presented here as like the most powerful thing imaginable. The basis for all of the actual gods. I think it's to do with that. It's related to that. Neo, what do you think?
No, am I understanding you right? You're saying like the idea of it's like the Boris Johnson Greek the marbles, the Parthenon marbles things. Like, this is too important for you guys to have. We need to keep this because we can take better care of you. That's predicated on the idea of there's some super sacred, really powerful, really important culture that the modern version is kind of not sufficiently connected with. It's a very racist kind of idea we're playing with here. But and then that kind of that mystique, that older culture that, like, the British are saying, this culture, you're kind of disconnected with it, so we can take care of this ancient cool culture better than you. That makes, like, Sutekh and that feels so powerful that it kind of fits into the villain feeling seismic for this episode. Am I understanding you right?
It's not necessarily like a direct thing, but I think it's like one has a long lineage. It's connected. Like, over the process of all these years of, like, you know, the opening of the tombs and, you know, the whole I guess journey of Egyptology, that leads to these cursed mummy stories of, you know, the ancient power coming back, because then that's the paranoia about these places that we've plundered, the idea that some violence might come back and, you know, inflict itself on, like, the metropole, you know, through ancient, sinister, superstitious magics of the savages and all of that. The idea that something dark could be there.
It's very Gothic again, yeah.
And then those stories kind of get transmuted into Pyramids of Mars. So it's not like a direct one-to-one thing, but I think the chain of connection is there. And I think ultimately, yeah, it does contribute to why this idea of, like, the great gods of the Osirians are kind of located as an Egyptian thing. I just want to say, that idea of setting it in a British museum, that sounds amazing to me. I'm really fascinated by that. Obviously, maybe you'd lose, like, the woods stuff, but just the idea of being surrounded by all these other kind of British kind of appropriated cultural artifacts and doing it in the corridors of that museum, that sounds absolutely ravishing to me. I feel like that would really enhance the whole layer of, like, Egyptology as this discourse, this process with all its strange little kind of ghoulish nuances. I think that would be a really fun kind of alternative interpretation of that story.
Yeah. I think you're right in saying that, and I think that's probably because I imagine, you know, I haven't read it, but I imagine the original script is more focused on Egypt and the ancient Egyptians and the gods in Egyptology, whereas the script that we did eventually get is this almost discordant, although I feel that it resolves itself by part 4, relationship between the kind of 3 layers that it's got: the occultism and science and Egypt.
There's an aspect of the cultural consideration stuff we haven't talked about yet, which is, so the director, Patty Russell, who was like she was always described, very, 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 very competent director, basically. Real director, very competent director. Had a lot of clashes with Tom Baker out of that competency. But anyway, the director when she was considering actors to play Ibrahim, she was considering all ethnicities, basically. She was thinking about an Indian actor, she was thinking about a Hispanic actor. She ended up going with the person she went with, who, how was Ibrahim realized in the episode?
Well, he wears a fez.
Yeah.
And he has a beard.
Yeah. Tyler, what am I avoiding saying?
Well, that he's played by an English white man.
Right. Are they trying to make him, like, to what extent are they trying to make him look Egyptian?
Is he wearing a wig? I can't tell. He's got if he isn't, he's got a beautiful head of hair, but he's got sort of thick black curly locks of hair and a quite a thick bushy kind of beard, and it looks to me, although I don't know, I haven't seen any other instances of this actor. It looks to me as though his face is painted brown.
I don't have, like, complete confidence in, like, whether they did anything like that, but I think to me they are trying to communicate this idea that he is. I mean, he literally says himself, like, he kind of sort of describes himself as a foreigner, and I mean does, like, when he's kind of paraphrasing what Warlock would say to the authorities when in his complaint, he says, "Well, you're going to say that a foreigner's taken over the thing?"
Yeah.
So I think that the story is clearly, like, intends that he's come, I guess, from, like, you know, that Scarman has kind of, like, picked him up in his, like, Egyptological expeditions, basically. So he's in that role that you would get in some of these mummy stories of kind of the insidious, like, the guy who was actually secretly a cultist of the old gods and is actually going to come to England and start causing havoc, basically, and help to unleash the dark god or the mummy or whatever's going on there. So ultimately, you know, he's a racist stereotype. I don't think we can avoid that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the essence of this conversation.
I think it's kind of eclipsed because obviously this specific creative era, does so much worse with a related thing in the next season. But yeah, It's especially a shame that the director was thinking about like casting an actual Egyptian actor as Ibrahim. Like that doesn't make the character not a stereotype. I can understand the different ways in which it would then be uncomfortable, but it is always tiresome to see this sort of casting. I think in Classic Who, how would you have felt if it was an Egyptian actor playing him?
In a way, like just doing it the usual kind of like white dude version, it's almost like truer to the racism of the premise, isn't it? Like at least it's honest. Like this is you're literally just doing like this kind of like xenophobic, sort of unreconstructed, like cultural prejudice kind of narrative that you're just completely reproducing here. So yeah, go on, yeah, do what you like. Cast a white dude. I don't care. Fuck it. Yeah, you just do your racism. You have fun there.
I guess this was the how to describe this. This was like level 1. And then next season they would go to they would upgrade to level 10 on the racism game they were playing. But that's an entirely different conversation. Something else, something. We've been talking around episode 4. Tyler sounds like he has really interesting opinions on it. I want to say some episode 4 things. So why is episode 4 the way that it is? Episode 4 is on a lot of closed sets. The deal with episode 4 was, well, I'll go into the whole genesis of who wrote this story and where all that came from soon. But basically, when it came to episode 4, a lot of stuff had already been used, but they still had 25 minutes left to fill. There were a lot of issues. Most characters were dead at this point in the story. They couldn't afford to build more sets, go outside, do chases or anything like that, but they had to have a whole fourth part of the story. So what they could use CSO, they could do stuff with that, but what to do. Hinchcliffe knew the answer. Kafka. What else? Kafka. Not from the trial, but from the castle, his unfinished one. Hinchcliffe remembered logic puzzles in that, and he thought those were kind of interesting. And so he was saying to Robert Holmes, can we do an interior and we do things with logic puzzles? And the way Hinchcliffe describes it is the two of them agreed it wasn't really a great idea, but it was an idea that would work. They would be able to make an episode kind of around this idea of progressing through logical puzzles in these closed sets and using a lot of CSO and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of what episode 4 evolved out of. And Hinchcliffe thinks that it kind of, he says, kids in the schoolyard would probably be repeating the logic puzzles to them the next day. And so that's always good. That's the kind of essence of the constraints of episode 4. And I know we haven't got to this conversation yet, but the 2024 version of the episode just junks a lot of episode 4 outright because it is kind of
superfluous.
Yeah, which that's in keeping with the story riffing on this in 2024 as well from Russell T Davies. But yeah, a lot of people don't like episode 4. I think largely because of that reason, it feels kind of superfluous. But there are lots. It's not just the Tales of the TARDIS version that cuts that down. There were rebroadcasts of this story. One of them was the most highest rated Doctor Who thing ever, a cut of this story that slimmed it down a little bit back in the day. So people have probably experienced slightly different versions of the story. If we were talking to someone now who had only seen the 2024 version, they'd probably think, why are you hating on the bit at the end so much? It was pretty quick. Whereas we've seen the 25-minute version of the ending. I'm being so negative about it, and Tyler, you like it. Why don't you talk about episode 4 more?
Okay, sure. I think the opening, as I mentioned, the opening two-hander of Wolf and Baker is so amazing. I think that's really, really great work from both of them there.
Yeah.
But I think what I really love that runs throughout the story, right from the beginning, is I've spoken about the discordance between Egyptology and occultism and science, and I think here it really feels like a showdown between science and magic, science and kind of fantasy, or however it is that you want to describe the kind of surreal, fantastical elements of this story. It really culminates here, and I think it feels. I'll be honest, because although I love this a lot, that I can't deny that there's sort of elements of messiness to it, but there's a kind of I don't know if you'll agree. There's a kind of homogenous kind of messiness to this. It kind of feels, although it's all a bit kind of hodgepodge together, it works. I think the landing's stuck in this final part. So all of this stuff with the Eye of Horus, with what else is happening here? We talk about people with dome-shaped heads and cerebrums like spiral staircases. This is a type of alien that we haven't seen in Doctor Who before, and the fact that we have it explained to us rather than shown to us is quite interesting, because it kind of it leaves that entirely to the imagination. I think the Doctor becoming a puppet of Sutekh is one of these things. That's the Doctor completely overcome, and Sarah left terrified and alone. And then, obviously, all of that stuff is kind of clashing with the radio waves passing between Mars and Earth, and the kind of, like I've spoken about, the logic puzzles, IQ test kind of traps. And the Doctor kind of techno-babbling, that line, 120-something centimeters multiplied by binary figure 0010. That's correct. And I love it when the Doctor's technical babble is complete nonsense. And I assume, a lot of that would have come from Tom Baker, or Holmes perhaps. I don't know who that comes from. I don't know who I can blame for that. But I think that's I think that's it's quite sort of symbolic of the like. How should I put this? I think the science of this episode is as unsure of itself as the fantasy of this episode, and I think the kind of conjoining of them in that final resolution where science ultimately must always prevail in Hinchcliffe, Doctor Who, and it does because it's the more prominent feature of this story, the science fiction of this story. As Gig said in the opening, it's all of this story, although it's about Egypt and occultism, it's kind of really about machinery and building machinery and flying to Mars and the mummies are not fantasy mummies like we expect they are, but they're robots and obviously, of course, the Doctor saves the day by what is it that he does exactly? How would you describe what he does? He uses the radio waves that pass between Mars and Earth. That buys him 2 minutes or just under 2 minutes.
Like dilates them.
And he dilates them. That's a good word for it. He dilates them to kind of trap Sutekh in the temporal vortex that he's using to break free of his tomb. And kind of traps him in that and sends him thousands of years into the future, so that by the time he escapes, he'll be dead. So I think that's a clear conjoining there of the sci-fi / fantasy that this story is doing. What I really want to say about the story is that what I like about this story is the kind of magical occultist elements of it. I love that. It's very, very kind of on the nose, very, very on the surface stuff, between things like the Eye of Horus existing at all. We're talking about a battle of gods and Egyptology, where there's a character called Dr. Warlock. We're doing like evil chants to summon forth gods and things. And although that's the kind of story that I would prefer from Doctor Who to be outright, fantastical in that way, I appreciate that the kind of the fundamental element, what we're trying to get across in Doctor Who in season 13 is that fundamentally, although we can do anything with Doctor Who, we can say anything, we can go anywhere, it all comes down to science, and the Doctor saves the day through science. And I think the Hinchcliffe project is exemplified in part 4.
I would say with part 4, everything up to like the Doctor being freed from Sutekh's possession, which is a pretty good chunk of that the 4th episode, I think is still great. I love when he reveals that he's not dead, because Sarah's crying over him, and then we see his hand come out of the frame and just tap her on the back, and it's a laugh out loud moment. It's lovely. I think the issue with from there up to the moment the Eye of Horus is destroyed, so when the Doctor and Sarah are going through those puzzle rooms, I think the issue is really that they don't get to do much of the cool dialogue or characterization stuff that they've been doing all story, because they just kind of, at one point Sarah gets stuck in a tube and she can't talk anymore, so the Doctor's just like babbling to himself. It's like, we're not playing to the strengths of this story anymore, which is a bit frustrating. I think you could I say easily, obviously it's not easy, but I think you could have come up with something else for the Doctor and Sarah to do, some other trap for them to be in, that could, even if it's completely unrelated to the wider plot, it could still have given them like better or like more fun things to do. But it's kind of a quibble. That one puzzle that they do with the 2 grids of symbols, like, I was so confused watching that, because when Sutekh solves it, it looks like he just overlays them on top of each other and like spots the difference, like the one he presses, the one where they don't match up. But then the Doctor does this whole explanation where it's like, oh, dude, you square the blooming length distances. I'm like, what the fuck? Really, really confusing. I think because the issue with that scene, it doesn't seem to have the narrative journey of that scene seems to be missing as well. And then the one when Sarah's in the tube, it's just like, it's taking the most basic kind of riddle of the Sphinx, whatever type kind of dilemma puzzle, but dressing it up in, so the Doctor gets, well, the two robots are counter-programmed so that one always speaks falsely. So in other words, one is programmed to lie. We're just consciously flowering up the dialogue to make it sound sciencey at that point. So it's kind of almost the fantasy as science thing become a parody of itself at that point, running out of ideas to how to keep spicing up that kind of myth versus science distinction, whereas it's been going quite strongly for most of the story. So I think just that chunk up to there is kind of a bit of a pain. But the actual ending, I love the moment when the Doctor sees all those doors open one after another, and we see that long corridor to the TARDIS. Great shot.
Yeah.
And everything from there to the end, I think, is brilliant, because that whole ending, where he realizes that there is actually time, and we find out after the fact, he just casually reveals that, yeah, we still have 2 minutes. We still have 2 minutes. After all of those great plans, that whole moment where we think it's the end of the fucking world, it's literally just a matter of it still takes time for those radio waves from the Iophorus, to reach Earth. There's still, you cannot get around that physical distance between these two planets. That is just a fact. And the fact that just that basic matter of space, something so mundane, really, is the key to just undoing all of Sutekh's great plans. I think it's that wonderful representation of how all the bombast and all the best laid plans are still subject to the brute laws of physics and time and space, and just like material reality, gravity, atoms, all of that. And if there is enough of a gap, if there is enough of just the slightest crack, for someone like the Doctor, a technician, someone with tools to worm his way in, then, the greatest edifice can be shattered, can crumble. I think that's the wonder, because you get the most hubristic villain, but also a villain who is so frustrated. Kind of his, Sutekh's impatience is his downfall, because he's so, he's been in this prison so long, unable to move. He's just like, just build that fucking rocket, get me out of here now. If he delayed the rocket and focused on killing the Doctor and Sarah Jane, he'd probably have won, but he doesn't, right? It's just those tiny little things that let the greatest villains fall to their ruin. And I think that's just wonderful cosmology of, I guess, morality and of power. I think that I guess exists in Robert Holmes' writing, kind of. He's very about kind of deflating these large figures, but also I guess in Doctor Who more broadly, it starts to feel like a quintessential Doctor Who thing as well. It's kind of the Doctor's position in the universe is this is how he beats those big, massive guys, because they're all subject to the same, I guess, reality as he is, and he can see just the tiny little things, just almost like silly, small little things that can destroy the greatest plots.
It's very material. I find it really inspiring. It's not played emotionally the way that, like how the Revive series would play it, but I think there's something quite beautiful in how it's that triumph of, it's not just a triumph of science, but like you're saying, Giga, that very minute, there's still a physical reality we'll have to share. For all of Sutekh's bombast, for all the big words any of them can use, or for all the great concepts, we're still all inhabiting the exact same physical reality, and there are certain laws of physics which govern all of us. I think that's a really inspiring thing to see. And I love Tom's performance. When it seems like the day is lost, he just marches very resolutely into the TARDIS. They walk back. He doesn't look super stressed, but it's just like he's almost going in autopilot. I have 120 seconds to manage this. I'm doing it right now. I love the ending of that. And I also think it's why I see some people just kind of cast it aside as like techno babble or whatever, or they act like it's kind of stitched on the way some parts of episode 4 feel, but it's not at all. All those scenes with Scarman's brother, the nice Scarman, throughout the 4 episodes build to this. There's so much stuff in episode 2 which I feel like is building to this climax, where we're going through his radioscope and the way that physical reality works. And when he comes into the TARDIS, the Doctor has all these conversations with him about time travel and space and the way all these things work. I feel like we really build up to it. I don't feel like it's divorced from the rest of the serial at all. How do you guys feel about that?
I think parts 2 and 3 use Laurence Scarman really wonderfully, because he's, I feel that Laurence, that the actor for Laurence Scarman really kind of inhabits this role. He's really,
he's great.
Really feeling this role. And at one point, I think this is either part 2 or 3, when the Doctor tells him that this is it. Laurence is gone. He's been gone for a long time. He's gone for good. You need to, get over this. where he hangs his head, and he continues to hang his head, like lamenting throughout, Sarah Jane and the Doctor talking for about a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And I was kind of watching him throughout, because the first time I watched this story, the first couple of times I watched this, I must admit that I found Laurence Scarman a bit of a drag. But I realise, I realise now that there's a real emotional heart to this story and that character and the relationship between the two brothers. And I wonder if he was praying in that instance. Obviously, that's conjecture, but it looks as if he might be. And that, of course, comes to a really resolute end in Marcus Scarman's life. He kind of is freed. He announces that I'm free at last in part 4, and then of course dies and kills over, and then he becomes ashes, and then the ashes turn to scorch marks, and he's gone forever.
Love that shot.
Yeah,
it's really wonderful shot, really haunting, really horrifying. And then, of course, therefore he becomes the last of the cast of characters to die. So only the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane escape from this adventure alive. Everybody else is dead. So I think that's the kind of the characterful, emotional beating heart of this story. I think Gig, you mentioned that in part 4 there's a lot of the character stuff is dropped, and unfortunately it is. I agree. But what Elizabeth Sladen manages to do really wonderfully is, while the Doctor is this puppet of Sutekh, she's the absolute fear and horror and grief that she's feeling is palpable. She's such a great theatrical actor, Miss Sladen. And when we believe that there's a possibility that the Doctor is dead, she's brilliant. She cries over his body, and it really feels that Sarah Jane's all alone. It's just Sarah and the TARDIS. So that's wonderful. But of course that's not so much dialogue and script as it is Sladen's acting. And then of course it's all dropped as usual when the Doctor gets up, and they all spring back into action, and we move on from this as though nothing happened. The same with Marcus Scarman's death. Actually, we move on from that as if we didn't just watch a man who's been possessed for a full day breathe, have life breathed back into him momentarily before he turns to ashes and scorches the earth. The final thing I have to say about character in part 4, in defense of characterization, is that it all kind of goes to Sutekh, doesn't it? It's all kind of given to Sutekh's motivations. But as opposed to a lot of what Doctor Who was doing at the time with its villains, Sutekh's motivations feel very linked to his emotions, the way he feels, the fact that he's given a moment of relief. You really feel his relief, don't you? That his paralysis has been lifted, and he has that great moment where he stands up and moves his arms around and declares that he's free. So I think a lot of the characterization stuff that had been really present in parts 2 and 3 in the Scarman brothers particularly is given to Sutekh in part 4.
Marcus's brother, Sir Laurence, I guess that his death in the end comes from him still trying to believe that some vestige of his brother is kind of there in that kind of puppet of Sutekh. I mean, there was some kind of some of the moments that possessed Marcus gets when he's like, "Oh, the human." It's almost a bit of comedy to that, actually. But in that thing of in that moment of Laurence ultimately being killed by Marcus because he's still clinging to this hope, this idea that his brother's still in there and could be brought back somehow, even though the Doctor's telling him that this is not happening, this is not. In terms of what that represents regarding this whole, there's this whole rationality versus I guess superstition, paranoia thing. So would you say in his kind of clinging to the belief that his brother could still be alive somehow, or that he could talk to his brother, make his brother see sense somehow, would you say that is an excess of
faith over science?
Yeah, faith over science, or is it because the thing is, it could also be kind of framed in the reverse way, in that he only has the Doctor's word to go on that any of this kind of super sciencey shit.
Yeah.
Could it be that it's a failure of his version of rationality to sufficiently expand to accommodate kind of the higher level of science that's going on with the Osirans and whatnot? Because there's not really much empirical evidence for someone to believe that possession and stuff like this is real all of a sudden out of nowhere. So it's kind of it's rationality that needs to grow, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's that what he says to Marcus is, "Marcus, you're ill. Let me help you." And then when Marcus, obviously Marcus kind of snaps back briefly, sort of vaguely for a moment.
That's the thing, yeah.
And then he snaps back into his suit. No, I am Sutekh. I am the god of death. I am blah blah blah. And Laurence says to him, "No, none of that is real." So yeah, I think what's happening there is a kind of both the. This is obviously both of these men are scientists. These are very very learned, very intelligent British Empire scientists. So I think their worldviews. I think what's being said here. I think their worldviews are inherently kind of limited by the time in which they exist. Because although, of course, he invents the radio telescope or whatever that's called, however many years early the Doctor says. Although he's this great scientist, I think ultimately he can't. Although traveling in time, although seeing the future as Sutekh would leave it, he can't seem to accept even, and this of course leads to his death. He can't seem to accept that any of this kind of surreal, what must appear magical, what does appear magical, he can't accept that any of that could be real. So it's a kind of faith in science.
So I guess to tie that to the whole, meta-historicality that we were talking about a little bit earlier, in a way, if Laurence represents, he's the attempt to try and fit these events into, his own limited rational framework, whereas Ibrahim Namin is kind of an unquestioning kind of an actual believer in the mythological version, kind of the superstition version, the religious version, whereas the actual truth is kind of a layer deeper, which is that this is a siren science. So it's not actually like ancient Egyptian magic, and it's not kind of 1911 era British understanding of science, but it is still a version of science that is simply more evolved, and the Doctor is the one who actually grasps that. So he's the one who can actually kind of go around all these kind of jackal-headed pots and kind of open them up and see that there is just technology inside. So he kind of represents, he's like the synthesis almost. So he's willing to actually confront kind of the ancient powers, but that's because he sees that they are not magical. They are just a form of science that is more advanced. So yeah, I guess those are the three different approaches. And I guess it's the way of putting them all on a spectrum, turning what appears to be the incomprehensible into something that is actually just very comprehensible if you just have the right understanding. So in other words, just an expansion of the scientific principles that we do grasp and recognize, just taken to, extremes that we don't recognize.
The complexity I really like in this scene with the brothers is, like Tyler mentioned, it's not like evil Scarman is just completely robotic and just completely Sutekh possessed and it's not working. The fact Laurence, it kind of seems to work a little bit, at least for a moment, when he shows him the photo and he says, "I was Marcus," and the actor's face is like spasming. Then he snaps back into it. But I feel like it would be so much more boring a conversation if that just hadn't worked at all. The fact it worked a little bit even makes you wonder, what if the Doctor maybe was a little bit wrong there? What if it could have worked? What if they could have actually snapped Marcus back? Could have been a very different story if they'd tried to go down that road. So I really like those kind of little notes of complexity the story has like that. We don't quite know which way it could have gone.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if perhaps that is what it's saying, because of course we do see Marcus in the end, don't we? We see Marcus just before he dies. And the Doctor and Sarah see him, but don't remark upon it.
Yeah, you wonder if there was another version of the story where the Doctor really concentrated on trying to snap Marcus out of possession. Maybe somehow they'd succeeded and then they'd use that to save the day or something. Yeah. But that doesn't fit the Fourth Doctor's character. But it's just interesting to think. I like that there's little complex notes like that in it. Something, Terrance Dicks in the novelisation, I'll bring this up now, he adds something to do with this Scarman brother stuff that I don't know what you guys will think of. So there's that scene after Laurence is dead where Sarah's kind of, "Don't you have a heart, Doctor? You're not reacting to this." And Tom's just kind of playing it off. We have work to do. Let's keep going on. He shouldn't have done what he did. Tom Baker plays it the way he plays it. Sladen plays it the way she plays it. In the novelisation, we're in like Sarah's point of view, and there's this little additional bit. I want to hear if you guys think this aligns with what Tom was doing or not. So they're having the conversation. Tom, the Fourth Doctor's looking at the technology and whatever.
Sarah could have shaken him. "A man's just been murdered and—" "5 men," interrupted the Doctor. "6 if you count Marcus Scarman himself. But there's no time for mourning, Sarah. Those deaths will be the first of untold millions, unless Sutekh is stopped." He looked down at the body. "Know thine enemy. Admirable advice. I did try to warn him, Sarah heard the pain in his voice and realized that the doctor was hiding his feelings under a mask of flippancy. "All right, Doctor," she said gently. "What do we do now?"
What do you think of that line about the Doctor hiding his emotions under flippancy?
I think there's a grain of truth in it, but it's overplaying it a little bit. And this idea that the Doctor would have pain in his voice, I tried to warn him. Even a little bit, it's like, nah, I don't really buy that. But I think there is some truth in the idea that the Doctor is not completely, he's not like emotionally dead, right? He knows that it is sad that all this is happening. But, you know, he is just, in a way, he is focused on the big picture here a little bit. So it's not that, obviously you watch the Fourth Doctor on screen, he is not this, font of gushing emotion who feels the pain for the slightest, crushed fly under no, he's not like that at all. So I think maybe the book is kind of painting him a little bit that way. But also it's like, if we're going to go with this idea that the Doctor's kind of hiding his emotions, I think he hides them very successfully. So I don't think you really hear pain in his voice, like even if he did actually feel it.
Yeah, that's definitely not what Tom Baker is doing. Perhaps it's the way that it was written, but I don't see it that way either. I think you really hit the nail on the head, Giga. I think the way that Tom Baker plays Doctor Who, not just in this episode, but in the the series as a whole, is he's beyond kind of menial kind of human matters. There's a lot of pomp to Tom Baker's Doctor, and it's all very serious and he's very kind of solemn and grave, and we see this in the very opening shot where he's kind of really interesting opening shot. Actually, we haven't really lingered on that not the opening shot, sorry, the opening of the Doctor and Sarah in the TARDIS, where he's kind of almost like a senile old man, standing like gravely staring, and Sarah comes sort of bounding in Victoria's clothing, and he calls her Victoria. That's a really interesting take on the Doctor, and obviously, he stares again when he says that time is whatever he says. Time is running amok, and time is my business. And he stares along at something. I love that shot. It kind of pans away from him while he's still staring at this something in the room that we can't see. Yeah, I think Tom Baker plays the Doctor very kind of pensively and solemnly, and he's got lots of kind of important matters going on in his head. So I think, although I agree, he's not necessarily he's not like emotionally destitute. He's not. He doesn't. It's not so much of a big deal to him that Laurence Scarman is dead. And I think the other thing to mention on this is that he didn't like Laurence Scarman. Because Laurence Scarman kind of betrayed his trust and his orders and almost got Sarah Jane killed, and he kind of barks at Laurence a few times. So the fact that Laurence dies, I think this Doctor in his kind of grandiosity kind of sees it as no big loss that this man has died. I think he almost kind of sees it that. I think I think the way that Baker plays this, and I think this is the right way to play this line, is that when he says, "I tried to warn him," but I think you need to take that at face value. I think what the Doctor is saying there is that, well, I did tell him a few times, and he didn't listen to me, and this is where he's ended up. I think that's what's going on there. I
think the way at certain points in this story, the way the Doctor kind of smiles at certain moments, you can kind of see how, I think on top of being sort of beyond sort of the small concerns, he's also in his own way a little bit intoxicated by the adventure, or like the thrill, or the danger kind of being imposed. Like when at certain moments when he realizes that something huge is going on, this mad kind of grin will kind of sneak its way into his face. Or sometimes it's not necessarily a mad one, sometimes it's a sad one. Like when he shows Sarah the horrible future and she's like, we've got to go back and stop him. It's kind of almost like a sad smile on Tom's face when he agrees with her. And I think to a certain extent it's like, so his brain is fully in the chase, and that's kind of where he is. He's kind of, he is so absorbed in fighting this battle and pursuing this just massive thing that is beyond him. It is beyond him. In a way, this is beyond the Time Lords. This is more powerful than anything he's ever faced. But just the madness of that, and the almost like impossible hope of ever defeating this, almost, it seems to energize him. That seems to be what energizes him and kind of like supercharges him. So it's like he does not have the mental capacity to exhaust on like fretting about like the lives of the individuals kind of getting caught up in this because something huge is taking place. I do love those moments, like when his eyes just bug out and he stares into space. I think it's really just a completely iconic, just magnificent kind of performance, because you couldn't make it up, is the thing. It's so specific to him and it's so unique to him. It's just immediately it's just completely inextricable from his identity as a Doctor and as an actor.
The thing that Terrance Dicks, I think, removes from the character, is it Terrance Dicks that did that novelisation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that Dicks removes from this character is that this Hinchcliffe Doctor is like a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. So there's no room. He has no time, no room for smaller matters. Like you say, Gig, he's in the thrill of the chase. He's like an adrenaline junkie it's all about the bigger picture for him. It's all about the case that he's on, so to speak. I think the death of Laurence doesn't really affect him. I think actually the point of that moment between Sarah Jane and the Doctor, where she says sometimes you don't see him, and he says, "What human?" I think that the point of that little outburst from Sarah Jane is that she recognizes in him, not that she needs to be gentler on him because he's disguising his emotions, but I think she recognizes it in him a kind of actually a lack of empathy for Laurence's circumstances.
Tom's acting, interesting point. The director says that Tom would resist. He didn't like scenes where the Doctor wasn't in control of things, by and large. But if you were able to convince him, like, of the story sense of the scene, if you were really able to convince him this made sense to do and it was good for the character and everything, he would throw all of himself into that kind of submission, which is what she says he was doing in episode 4 when he's getting tortured by Sutekh. So that's not normally the sort of thing he likes to play, but if he's convinced, he will play it as hard as he can. I love those sequences. I think it's quite disturbing because he's the Doctor. He's meant to be in control of everything. Even in this, fourth Doctor, who's not a godly kind of Doctor like some later ones, but it's upsetting to see him just completely out of control and getting tortured and in so much pain and just getting toyed with by Sutekh. I really like how that works. I think tonally it feels off in a good way. It feels wrong. It feels kind of mildly disturbing. I like how Tom plays that a lot. Very serious.
It totally is disturbing, yeah, because like you say, this is very like this is a Doctor who's very much in control of every room that he's in. So to completely lose control in this way and to kind of make this cross on his chest and to call Sutekh master, it's really disturbing to witness that, especially in Tom Baker's characteristic booming voice. Yeah,
I think the fact that the stakes are so high is communicated through the fact that they actually make the Doctor not in control for once. They give the Doctor those scenes when he's in Sutekh's chamber and he's writhing in pain and like physically fighting to squeeze out words and like barking like, "No, I'll never submit to you." So to actually, even though it's just him in a room with Sutekh, just these two people in a room, it's not some world-ending like laser spaceship fight. It nonetheless feels like shit has hit the fan, purely because the Doctor is actually going through these emotions, that these physical torments, this completely helpless position where he is at the mercy of someone else, and that is so unusual. So it actually communicates this entirely cosmic, world-ending kind of situation just through this very small-scale setup with the actors. Pretty clever.
There's a scene we've talked about episode 4 a lot. There's a big scene in episode 2, very influential, very iconic scene that's worth talking about. So it's where Sarah's talking about we can just go back. Basically, this is what's happening right now is bad, but we have the TARDIS. We can travel kind of away from it. And the Doctor's like, well, can we? And so they go back to the future, so to speak, and the world's utterly devastated and the effects are a little bit dodgy, but you get the idea. World's complete in devastation outside. Interestingly, originally there was like an establishing shot of the TARDIS in the devastated future, but the director cut it because she thought it kind of gives away the game if you see it not from the character's point of view, but you kind of see it established kind of out of touch like that. But it's this idea that Hinchcliffe puts it like he doesn't really think that they came up with that idea of, you can't, as the story is ongoing, the thread is ongoing, you can't escape from it back into the future. He says that's like a Barry Letts idea, but what they did in Pyramids of Mars was they just explicated it in like an actual big scene substantiating that idea. And then it's something New Who would riff on The Unquiet Dead. They wanted to do a version of that scene for The Unquiet Dead, but they couldn't afford it. The Devil's Cord, they did do a version of that scene. So it's a very influential sort of scene to kind of make the stakes of how Doctor Who tends to do its timey-wimey stuff work. What do you think of that scene? I really like how Sladen reacts to that as well. What do you guys think of it?
I kind of like the effect of that. Well, not the effect so much, but I love them. What the actual image that they put outside the TARDIS door with that kind of rain-soaked, like desolate, I guess, quarry, kind of stormy. I love the sound design with the lightning flashes. I love Sarah's hair whipping in the wind. There's just a melodrama to that image I find really enjoyable. It feels almost, strangely, it feels almost like we've gone into a slightly different genre of Doctor Who when they show that. Because we've been wrapped up in this priory environment with kind of monsters waddling around the woods in broad daylight so much. Suddenly have this really almost like just operatic image of these storm-swept wasteland all of a sudden with completely different lighting. There's just, I enjoy just the incredibly heightened, weird romance of that getting dropped in. And I think the thing is, he mentions that they were just explicating an idea that was already in play. And I think that idea is kind of implicit, because I think watching the story, watching any Doctor Who story, you know that if the stakes are that high, and the Doctor's the only one who can save the day, then he can't just run off, can he? He is part of these events. It's just kind of a logical consequence of what the show is. Like, if you could just have the Doctor fuck off in the middle of any event, then every world he runs into that is in danger would not be saved. It would just be ruined. Yeah. It's just that, if you turn away from these things, if you choose the path of inaction, then you will leave disaster behind. That's just a consequence. It's the opposite perspective that would be weirder. The idea that the future would be guaranteed just because, just by itself, because we've seen it before, and the Doctor doesn't have to actually participate in saving these events that he has inserted himself into, that's kind of strange in itself, because that's treating the future as fixed just because it is, rather than the fact it's fixed because of a cause, and that cause is happening to be, the Doctor saving the day. Does that make sense? So it's almost something you don't necessarily have to explicate it, because they do lots of stories where this is just implicit. The Doctor's always like, well, we have to fight this, we have to save the day, we have to do this. It's kind of obvious. So you don't necessarily need to show stuff like this. But I think, again, it is done in this story to communicate, I guess, these stakes, I guess the significance of this antagonist in particular as an actual godlike threat who can do this. Because there are lots of Doctor Who villains who will destroy the world if you don't stop them. But I think the importance of doing it in this case is that we're trying to inflate this particular villain as one of actual godly power. Like, he could do this through sheer will alone. He's not like the Slovene who are just going to blow up a bomb or something like that. He's actually, this is a guy who actually wants to create this world for its own sake, in this horrible, desolate wasteland everywhere. Like, this is his identity almost, this devastation. So it's kind of important to show it.
Had Doctor Who done this before? This kind of, because this is kind of a thesis statement about what time travel in Doctor Who and the stakes of the Doctor's interference in time kind of means. And I can't think of an instance before 1975, that Doctor Who kind of explicitly shows the implications of that.
I'm sure it had been in dialogue before, but this is, I think, the first time we did like an example to really visually show it.
Yeah, visually see it, yeah. It's, Laurence's reaction to it is quite interesting. I think the one thing that he says in response to showing, seeing this future is he's fascinated by the fact that a man that he takes from what the Doctor's lesson about Sutekh's future, that a man can change the course of human history, which is so in the vein of Victorian, British scientists, sort of scientific kind of thinking, great men of history thinking.
I love the Doctor's phrasing in his response to that, because it's kind of almost getting away from an empirical chain of cause and effect there. Because what the Doctor says is, actually, a man can't change the course of history. It takes a being of Sutekh's almost limitless power to destroy the future. Like a man can change it to a certain extent, but if you're really powerful, you can actually do shit like this in a way to actually destroy the future. It's interesting because the way that sounds, it's almost not so much like a planet has been destroyed, but the future itself has been destroyed in some abstract way, it's such destruction that it almost destroys time or the capacity for things to exist in time, which I get it's getting more into the realms of kind of undefined sort of mystic woo with that. But I like just a slightly unexplicated language around like future time existence that starts to worm its way in there, because I think it just provokes the imagination a lot when stuff is presented like that. So if you have a sliding scale of power where a man can, like, you know, butterfly effect and have something blow up much later on, but if you have a god like Sutekh or in the siren like Sutekh with limitless power, then just, you know, everything, and that's how much physical power you need to actually destroy, like, to actually make the future, make the whole timeline go off its course into like doom and death. I just enjoy that.
I think this is kind of tangential to the point I was making about Laurence, but I find him, there's a kind of a common way to write these guest companions, which is to kind of essentially make them a third companion, like, you know, somebody that could feasibly join the TARDIS as a full-time companion. But what Laurence is instead is he doesn't quite grasp any of it. He doesn't grasp, like I say, the Doctor's warning about what the devastation that Sutekh could do. He doesn't grasp necessarily that the transdimensional factor of the TARDIS. He doesn't understand the time travel elements of it. He doesn't seem to listen to the Doctor's warnings. He becomes very overwhelmed with emotion quite a few times throughout. At one point, I think it's in part 2, he says, he kind of sits solemnly and goes, "You think I'll let you down again, don't you?" He's a very sad, very overwhelmed man who really doesn't belong in this world of science fiction and time travel and gods, which is a really interesting take on what a guest companion can do, and it's kind of inevitable that he dies at the end at the hand of his biggest kind of fear, his biggest emotional drive is to get Marcus Scarman back, and the fact that it's Marcus Scarman's Sutekh puppet corpse that kills him is very fitting.
The possession stuff with Marcus is interesting. Hinchcliffe says there's a reason it wasn't arbitrary that they did possession so much in his era with Robert Holmes. He says that comes from the fact that Hinchcliffe and Holmes didn't have a lot of faith. They didn't believe so much in hinging stories on straightforward monsters, because that means hinging stories on how good you can make the costumes, how, you know, effective the costumes can look, which I think Hinchcliffe seems to regard as a bit of a fool's game. So how to get around that? You can get great actors in Doctor Who. So what can you do with the actors if you know, trying to do some sort of supernatural threat? Well, you have the threat possess the actors who still look human, pretty much. You might do some makeup on them, like on Marcus here, to make them look more pallid or whatever. But the idea of lots of stories where a human, still played by a regular actor, not in prosthetics, not in a costume, is possessed by an alien or some kind of supernatural force, is something they kept coming back to, just because that kind of fit in with their philosophy of the show, what they thought the show was good at, you know, getting good actors in, what they thought the show was bad at, monster costumes being really believable and arresting and everything. So that's one of the reasons they kept coming back to that kind of well. What do you think of that?
It's very fortuitous, isn't it, that device plays in so well to all of their, I guess, their horror themes, because possession, the idea of having your mind actually invaded, is kind of really wrapped up in those ideas of, you know, the non-corporeal, the abstract, you know, the ghosts or spirits or things that coming from things coming from the underworld and invading like the empirical realm. And I think the possession is kind of one of the core ways that kind of thing happens in like horror fiction, I guess. So it's kind of very it's very fortunate that this technique to get to avoid crap-looking monsters and such happens to align perfectly well with these great horror ideas. I guess in a way, it's this symbiotic, really well-matched relationship between Doctor Who as a drama, then I guess on TV, that focuses on good acting, ideally, and, you know, good dialogue, ideally, and I guess this gothic horror genre that they were playing with, which revolves around, I guess, almost not so much the visual horror necessarily of like scary mummies and monsters and such, but about the things that they do to the minds of the people, I guess, that find themselves in these scenarios. I guess the things that happen to these characters, the situations they get into. So, the things that these paranoias and superstitions about, like, the curses and things kind of do to people, the reactions people have to that. I guess those ideas are kind of central to, this genre of Doctor Who story that's going on, and also sometimes the psychology of the villain characters like Sutekh or Morbius. That's just the things that are going on in their head. So all of that is supercharged it's fueled by having really good actors in all of these roles. So I guess they settled on a fusion of genres that is perfectly matched to the strengths of Doctor Who as a TV drama that revolves around acting and dialogue, basically.
Yeah, they what's the word for it? I guess holistic is the word for it. So much about their approach just seemed to work. Basically, everything kind of There's so many other areas where little things clang together, but basically everything they were doing seemed to just synthesize really well. Other stuff they've talked about in regards to their approach is that Hinchcliffe really wanted... The child audience was already pretty secure. He really wanted to kind of level up the show so that older, like more intelligent kids, as he puts it, would be more engaged, and like the adults watching would be more engaged as well. I think he really took it seriously that this, it wasn't a BBC Kids in any sense, in any whatever it was called in the different eras of the BBC. It was never that. It was always a BBC drama production. I think he took that really seriously, wanting the show to keep working for kids, but also there's no reason an adult shouldn't be engaging with the show as well, I think was his kind of view. Very serious with the actors, getting good actors in, that sort of thing. I know Hinchcliffe kind of bemoans on some commentaries and things the Sonic getting used as a wand in later iterations of the show, because he says he got advice from Terrance Dicks and Barry Letts, which was to be very careful with gadgets like the Sonic. Less is more when it comes to that. Hinchcliffe was a big believer. He was a big believer that the Doctor, if he seems invincible, you're kind of losing something. He should seem very clever and like he gets through things through his wit and his intelligence, but he shouldn't seem like a god himself so much. And Robert Holmes was a big believer in that. You can make a premise really weird. You can make a premise absurd. You can make a premise insane. You can do all your sci-fi magic-y stuff in your premise, but then from that, everything should kind of flow out logically from the premise. You can't kind of double bluff where your premise is weird and then you kind of break the rules of your premise. Everything, you can have one thing that's weird and then everything should flow out logically from there. They really just sound like they were very considered with everything. They don't sound like they were just kind of improvising off ideas. They really sounded like they wanted to have a big, this is our approach to the show. This is how we're going to do it. And it's all going to kind of cohere together. They've said they wanted scripts, they wanted you to be able to tell if like a script came from their era, which is part of why Robert Holmes was so, I know Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat were kind of the same, where they very, very, very rewrite happy. They'll rewrite tons of scripts. They'll rewrite tons of a script of a guest writer to kind of fit into how they see the show as it should be working, which, some eras have done to that degree, some eras haven't. They're very hardcore about that very specific approach they had to the show. I guess we're all kind of saying we think that was a good thing, but yeah, any thoughts on that?
That note about the Sonic that you just they can't just wave the Sonic everywhere. It's kind of worth noting that had this rough story structure happened in a future era, at the very end when the Doctor messes with the time space corridor, like that's the kind of thing that he would do with the Sonic, isn't it? Almost, if this was like a New Who story.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting nuance that instead of that, they have him get a thing from the TARDIS. I think they describe it as the time control from the TARDIS. Like a piece of the TARDIS, a bit of TARDIS kit that he brings out. It hasn't really been set up earlier in the story. It's just introduced to us as a bit of TARDIS thing. But it's to do with time, because the TARDIS is a time machine. So rather than an all-purpose tool that can just do the convenient thing, he has to get something that is kind of linked with his existing, I guess, arsenal, and kind of has a thematic link regarding like travel through time and space, because he obviously he's a time and space traveler, and this is a time space corridor that Sutekh is using, so there's a link there. And it's just that, because in terms of what actually happens, it's not that big of a difference, but it just tells you what kind of tone they wanted to strike there, rather than just have him wave a wand or whatever, just like flick something, and that messes with the time corridor. He has to actually go and use, I guess, something that's not really established, but nonetheless kind of I guess thematically established, because he's a time traveler. So it's to do with that. Hence it coming out of the premise rather than being like breaking the rules of the premise.
Something from the director rather than the Hinchcliffe Holmes team was that Paddy Russell, the director, was very stern that Sarah had to be like a strong character in the serial, but specifically in that she had to be good with the gun. And Sladen seems kind of maybe not confused, a little bit put off by this, like not kind of fully why would Sarah be like, what's the backstory to that? But Patty Russell is very firm. She needs to be a really good shot. It can't be a joke or like it needs to be very specific. Sarah's good at this. This is going to work when Sarah does it.
Paddy was very, very careful of the role of a female in it. And she was very careful that I was not allowed. I had to fire the gun, so it was absolutely correctly fired. I thought Sarah would actually not know how to fire a gun, and she would, have a bit of a mess at it, which maybe I would have quite liked to do, and then succeed in the end. But no, she wanted it. Oh no, Paddy wants it. You have to know how to fire a gun. I didn't see where in Sarah's background that came from.
And of course, the shot doesn't quite work because of Sutekh's timey-wimey power with holding the energy of the explosion or whatever. But it's kind of unexplained, like Sarah being so good with a gun, but I feel like it's a very iconic part of the serial. There's a lot of images of Sarah with a gun that are, very striking. What do we think of that scene, Sarah and the gun?
It's almost in the vein of New Who, isn't it? Giving a female character. It's very, very strange, unusual for a 1975 serial to give this female character a kind of a trait that stereotypically would be considered masculine. And I'm surprised to hear that Sladen was kind of reticent to the idea. I guess perhaps it was just fitting the idea that Sarah will be good with the gun in with her kind of backstory of the character. But I don't know. For me, I think it works really well. I don't necessarily need there to be a backstory, although I suppose if you wanted there to be, maybe Aunt Lavinia is also a good shot. Who knows?
There is something kind of nice when a character shows you an unexpected side of themselves.
Yeah.
The thing is, it doesn't have to be that Sarah has been on the front lines and killed people for sport or anything like that. No, she could just have practiced target practice, right? That you could do that in. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why someone might have practiced shooting a gun. It doesn't necessarily make Sarah some super violent character. She's not shooting people in this story. It's just a case of using a tool with a degree of learned precision. So I don't think it doesn't throw Sarah's character off her axis or anything like that. I kind of get why Sladen was like, what the fuck? But I agree. I think it's a great moment. I think I love that moment when she's just like, I know what I'm doing. When you can just actually trust the companion and the character to just get on with this thing that they've been given, and to not be, I guess, overwhelmed or at a loss or panicking or freaking out necessarily with the task that they've been given, and not really just not squeamish either. I think that's kind of important, because I guess it's just trying to push back, certainly on the director's part, just trying to push back on these ideas of the Doctor as the guy who knows what he's doing, and the companion as I mean, it's kind of too cliche to say damsel in distress, but I just kind of his useless kind of Muppet sidekick who is kind of constantly getting kidnapped or screaming for the Doctor or whatever like that. I think it's a very welcome kind of pushback, and just just in a small way, just reframing a little bit how competent the companion can be, and how and what kind of imagery we can present the companion with. I just want to say, I loved, and also the contrast of that Victoria dress that she wears at the start of the episode and she has on all story, this kind of Gothic, sort of feminine, very feminine kind of look, combined with, the gun and kind of the brutality and kind of just austere kind of image of that gun. I think those fit together very, very evocatively. I think there's a reason that image of her with the gun is so iconic. It's just very, very nice, and it's probably quite influential as well.
There's a note in the DVD info text that says some of the rewrites on the episode, we'll get into that soon, but some of the rewrites were to make Sarah kind of more active and smarter in the story, and that Tom Baker didn't like companions being too passive or weak. He thought that kind of reflected badly on the Doctor himself if the companions were too, what does this do, Doctor? What happens now, Doctor? What's going on, Doctor? So some lines that were originally scripted as the Doctor's were actually given to Sarah in some of the later development of the writing to kind of power her up a little bit. I really agree with Tom there that if a Doctor has really weak companions, it doesn't necessarily make him look smarter. It just makes the whole kind of thing seem a little more incompetent. It makes him kind of seem weirder. Why are you traveling with people that don't know what they're doing? I think it does make him seem stronger as well, if the companion's strong and smart too.
I love that idea of giving the Doctor's lines to Sarah. The fact that they could do that, the fact that it even makes sense to do that, I think it just shows, I guess, the genesis of this idea of the Doctor and companion kind of blurring a little bit, that kind of continues all the way through into New Who. And that's a really lovely thing, I think, that it doesn't have to be this strictly severe, a binary dynamic of this is Doctor, this is companion, this is smart one, this is like normal human one or whatever. Sometimes there can be a shared intelligence or wit or strength there, which is actually much more exciting.
There's this great moment in part 4 where Sarah knows that what the kind of science that he's channeling is called tribophysics.
Yeah.
And the Doctor kind of affirms her, and she kind of has this really lovely kind of glint in her eye that, I got it right. It's just, very, very great, lovely moment between those two.
An actor we haven't talked about much yet. And this is interesting because this is some of the friction behind the scene. Like, a lot of the friction was just the director was very hardcore and Tom Baker was like, this is my show. Not as much as he would eventually be, but, he's getting there. But one of the interesting bits of friction, not to do with the actor, was that Philip Hinchcliffe wasn't too hot on Gabriel Woolf's hiring as Sutekh at first. That came from the director, Paddy Russell, who was big on him and really wanted an actor who acted through his voice. He's a big voice actor, Gabriel Woolf. Lots of audiobook readings, that sort of thing. He's very good with his voice. Hinchcliffe was like surprised that they weren't going with more of an alien kind of voice for Sutekh, but Paddy Russell really defended the choice. And in the end, Hinchcliffe totally said, yeah, it 100% worked. She was right. Gabriel Woolf was the perfect casting. I think some people might not get as well, Gabriel Woolf's the actual actor. He's doing the voice live. Like, there's a microphone in the helmet. That's part of why Sutekh's voice is so whispery, because he's actually doing it inside the actual helmet. Doesn't want it to clip or whatever. So that's Gabriel Woolf in the actual mask, when they're talking to Tom Baker and everything like that. It feels trite to say now, but that was an amazing cast. I think it's the main reason the character actually works. It's such an interesting performance that Gabriel Woolf gives. It's not your usual classic Who ranting and raving. It's the kind of, I think the whispering affect of it works so well. What do you guys think of Gabriel Woolf in the story?
Loads of great calls from Paddy Russell. Yeah, loads of great calls from her in the story. Yeah, I really enjoy Gabriel Woolf in this story. I think he's softly spoken, at times, but he speaks very kind of animatedly, but more subdued than you'd expect most actors to do with that role. The lines are written to be kind of boomed ferociously, but what Woolf is doing is often very subtle. And when he is booming, he's very menacing. Yeah, I think he's great in this. I think I mentioned it earlier, but my favourite Sutekh line of dialogue is I think he says my paralysis has been lifted. I'm free at last. But the way that Gabriel Woolf delivers that, you really feel that this is somebody who's for time untold has been trapped in stasis and is now finally free to physically move around. He's very good and like much like Michael Sheard, Laurence really inhabits the character that he's playing in the story. Lots of great acting in the story, lots of it, which is really nice and kind of not a rarity, but kind of a scarcity in classic Doctor.
Yeah, Woolf is doing his utmost to imbue that character with humanity, which is unexpected because this character is being presented as like a god, this most horrible thing in all the universe, this destroyer of worlds. So, but I think it is ultimately the exact right choice because in a way the script is also, in its own way, trying to play up this little bit, that little glimmer of, I guess, humanity feels like the wrong word, but personality within Sutekh. Because ultimately what he's doing, he's working his brain to the limit, trying to keep all the shit together, like withholding Sarah's gunshot from blowing up the rocket, and also possessing all these things and managing all these things. Like in a way, it's kind of a relatable feeling because he's being overwhelmed, like mentally, with just the sheer burden and just how much of a hassle this is. Just to free himself, just to feel like free and good for once in like thousands and thousands of years. So there is real like recognizable emotion in that character, which kind of the script is playing up and which Woolf kind of leans into and takes incredibly seriously. He plays the character from that character's point of view. He sees that character's point of view entirely. And he just imbues in every like small little inflection of the slightest thing. You can hear his frustration. You can hear his touches of derision, or even like nervousness at some points, or just how he kind of like psychologically manages the various tasks that are piling up on top of him as more and more kind of interferences pile up. So yeah, and also I love that whole thing of him being like actually saying it inside the mask with the little microphones and him having to whisper everything, because I think that really enhances it. Because he sounds like he's talking in your ear almost whenever we hear him, like he's like an ASMR thing, like he's whispering into your ear, just incredibly serpentine, snake-like. It's just really it's just fantastic, and it sounds very uncomfortable to listen to. It's skin-crawlingly creepy, but it also means that every last little inflection in that performance is like magnified amplified because he's talking so quietly, almost. So it's like it's super intensified.
A scene I love for that whispering stuff is when we get the little Paradise Lost illusion, the all good to me is lost, evil be thou my good, with the you use your powers for evil, your evil is my good. When he continues on and he's doing the where I tread I leave nothing but dust and darkness, that in so many classic Who villains you can picture how they would perform that, which would be like this huge, very making a huge meal out of it, that thing. And even when Gabriel Woolf's reprised the role in like other things, sometimes he is going a little bit over the top with it. But I love how he almost kind of he's saying like such a ridiculously hyperbolic evil thing there, but he's kind of swallowing it, and how it's so subtle and he's so whispery how he's saying it. I'm Sutekh the Destroyer. Like it's ASMR totally. I really love that. It makes it so much more iconic. If he just boomed that out, whether it was like 80 and later or whatever, I don't feel like we'd remember the villain in the same way. It's like Gig says, it's like he's piercing into your ear how he's talking. It really captures your imagination. I think it's part of why he's been remembered so well. He feels disturbing, and there's so much personality in how he talks as well. He doesn't just feel evil. He feels frustrated. He feels impotent. There's like really specific bits of aggression we get from him. I really, really like that. Just a really great performance. The another thing Hinchcliffe didn't like about Sutekh was we talked a bit earlier about how Hinchcliffe was a bit, didn't like hinging things on monster costumes. The actual mask, which was modeled apparently on like images of Sutekh, the actual Egyptian god, he thinks the collar around the throat looked really weird. You know, when he's actually in dog mode, when the mask is off, and when Scarman turns into Sutekh and you can like see the collar, he didn't like how that looked. And just that in general, he wasn't totally convinced by the effect of how Sutekh really looked in his dog mode there. We've seen different visual interpretations of Sutekh, which I think work less well. And the 2024 revitalization, I think, kind of made it look a little more solid, just by some little tweaks to how they made like that mask dog version of him move towards the end when he's talking to the Doctor from the time corridor. But yeah, what do you guys think of the actual, I guess both the actual iconic mask, but also the little dog Sutekh underneath? What do you guys think of the visuals?
I love both of them. Both very, they're visuals that you can't really forget, aren't they? They're very kind of haunting. I think the kind of the dog kind of bestial mask thing, it's not so obviously, and we're talking about 2024 now, so that's a kind of a more they're kind of honing on the kind of canine elements, but I think that it's that mask has been compared to a jackal, hasn't it? I think it's people said it's closer to a jackal than a dog, and in fact, it's not really close to a jackal at all either. It's kind of its own kind of alien beast, which is it's a really striking image. Really great to leave with that in the TARDIS in part one, and of course the sarcophagus Sutekh is amazing, really amazing. That's the one that really sticks in mind, and I'm surprised that wasn't reprised this year.
I kind of wonder, the image we see projected into the TARDIS in part one looks actually quite different from the eventual reveal of Sutekh's face under the mask. I always wondered about that, because there's kind of a different vibe to them. Like, I wonder if they were just made at different times. Like, the version that we see in the TARDIS, there's more like this snarling, almost bat-like kind of creature. It's kind of a more pronounced mouth, almost, and we see it at a different kind of angle. Whereas the version that we get, I guess the reveal of under Sutekh's mask, the ears are much more upright and kind of stiff looking. He's much longer, like snout wise. It's just a different vibe. I feel like the version under his mask is not quite as creepy, but it does have the staring, glowing eyes, which are very cool. In as much as they kind of, they're not quite symmetrical, so it looks like he's kind of pulling a kind of like sassy facial expression a little bit, which I find slightly strange. At the same time, though, I kind of wonder, what if we just never seen under Sutekh's mask at all? And what if it just been left to our imagination what this creature could possibly look like under the mask? Because I'm not sure. I mean, that shot actually of Scarman's head physically turning into the Osiran shape, I do like that, actually, because that is a very sudden moment of, what the fuck am I looking at? I like that sheer dissonance. That is very jarring, so I wouldn't want to lose that. But I do think the external mask Sutekh wears is so incredibly evocative, with those two beady, like, black eyes that light up, with that kind of almost snake-like shape down the middle of his face, just everything about that is so fantastic. There's a reason that is the iconic image of Sutekh and not really his actual face so much.
Do you want to hear why the story is written by a fake man, a man that doesn't exist, Stephen Harris?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll try and zip through this. So, season 12 was working off, a lot of the past, the Barry Letts kind of era of Doctor Who. Season 13, like we said, was when Hinchcliffe and Holmes were really coming into their own, codifying their own era. Hinchcliffe was trying to get different writers in, writers he thought were good, writers, that Hinchcliffe and Holmes would work out the story concepts, like the same as New Who. They'd work out the story concepts for the season, but then they'd go after different writers. Do you want to do this? Can you do this? That sort of thing. So the guy they went after to do this story was Louis Greifer, who had done plenty of TV before. He'd done some of The Prisoner, so knew what he was doing. Good writer. Hinchcliffe knew of him. So Robert Holmes and Barry Letts approached Greifer, asking him why don't you do a story about Egyptology? Because Holmes wanted to do something with like the Hammer Horror Egypt stuff. Louis Greifer was into Egyptology. It just all seemed like it would work out. So in July 1974, Greifer submitted a storyline about the Doctor and the Brigadier in a battle with Seth, the Egyptian god, Greifer's idea was all about grain. So the Egyptian god Seth was launching doctored grain that he wanted to germinate on the moon to destroy Earth. So it was a grain story, a classic grain story.
Grain on the moon destroying Earth? Like, how?
Yeah, it's one of the... I know there's too many of these stories out there, so Greifer wanted to do another one. Greifer wasn't... Hinchcliffe's usually pretty diplomatic about it, but it's... some people just get Doctor Who, they click in, they lock in really easily. They're the types of writers that seem to get rehired tons and tons, both on classic and New Who. Other people who get the format. It sounds like Greifer didn't really get the format. So there was a lot of back and forth trying to develop this story, Doctor Who and the Pyramids of Mars. Can we get more sci-fi into it? Can we get more active storytelling in it? So it developed over time. Martians, the Egyptians would be Martians at a certain point. A lot of ancient alien stuff with the Martian Egyptian gods discovering humans and then that sort of thing, but then Martian Egypt aliens aren't allowed to do blah, 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 so they go back to Mars. Lots of this sort of stuff that's not really resembling the final serial we got. Osiris was going to be like the nice alien Martian that believed mankind would help develop and colonize other worlds, but Seth would disagree, and so there'd be a fight over what to do with the Earthlings, and then, that would be part of why they get trapped in a pyramid. So Holmes kept doing a back and forth with Greifer, like, why don't we change this? Why don't we do that? What's the deal with the grain? Can we downplay the grain? Sort of thing. Holmes said, quote, Doctor Who adventures set on Earth and involving... Well, Holmes talked about that Doctor Who adventures set on Earth and involving unit are roughly contemporary, so we allow ourselves the leeway of 4 or 5 years of scientific discoveries by suggesting they take place in the near future. So Holmes said, instead of all this grain stuff, why don't we have it that humans are working on a 200-year project to revitalize Mars? And so that's, like a terraforming kind of thing instead. So the story kept changing around. Real-life developments. Egypt doesn't allow ancient artifacts to leave Egypt anymore. So where's the sarcophagus come from? What are we doing in there? Could it have been lost on a shipwreck and rediscovered by like a team underwater from Britain recently? Then there was the British Museum idea. Could the sarcophagus be in the back room of a British museum? Holmes thought it was unlikely the museum would let them film there, but hey, maybe. It could be interesting. Lots of different visual ideas. Could we get robot scorpions in? Could we do this? Could we do that? We're flitting around. The Martian idea started getting a little bit wobbly. Could we do something else besides Egypt Martians? Greifer sounds like he was struggling with getting the Doctor and Sarah in there, as Holmes would like them to be. Brigadier in suspended animation. So the Brigadier would get mummified in Greifer's story. And so Holmes didn't really like that idea. Please don't leave our poor old Brigadier in suspended animation. We need him for subsequent stories, said Holmes. So the idea of the Brigadier getting possessed by the Scorpion was Holmes' suggestion. Could it be working with Seth that way? Mars rockets, Mars warheads, all that stuff had kind of developed by now. Could someone be trapped in a Mars rocket for the Doctor to rescue in the final episode to get some stakes in there? So eventually that kind of developed in a getting Sarah more role in the story, which doesn't sound like Greifer was doing so much. Greifer delivered a very densely plotted revised script to all these kinds of Holmes notes. Hinchcliffe said this very densely plotted version would be suitable to a crime show, but it wouldn't really fit Doctor Who. Well, before I continue, what are you guys thinking of this Greifer version of the story that you've heard about so far? Densely plotted grain, Brigadier, trapped.
It sounds like it feels like it would almost too consciously be trying to solve a problem without answer a question that hadn't been asked. Like who asked for this? This whole like dense grain, just trying to work in all this shit rather than have a simple, clear idea with like a good point to it. It seems like it was trying to retroactively work all this stuff in and kind of get in all these tangles and stuff. And like, I'm not super jazzed about the idea of having the Brigadier in there as well. I don't know. It just feels like it's just doing too much, is what it sounds like.
Occasionally, you'll come across and sometimes there are serials that exist. Occasionally, you'll come across a script where, and usually they're rejected, where its writer doesn't seem to understand Doctor Who, doesn't seem to understand the prompt, and I think like Gig says, the kind of the cramming of lots of different Doctor Who elements into something that it kind of feels as though there is an idea here. There is something, I'm not completely shitting on the idea. There is something to this, but it's not Doctor Who. And to try and impose some of the Doctor Who kind of blueprints of the time, especially the Brigadier, that kind of I'm glad that lots of this was mixed. Reminds me a lot, actually, of there's some elements between this and the Impossible Planet and the Satan bit, which is interesting because that obviously was kind of harking back to.
So before Holmes takes over, we're still in the Greifer zone now. Greifer, the complete history book phrases as Greifer lost himself in the complexities of Pyramids of Mars, but he delivered an actual Part 1 script. So the version of the story now. It was at the British Museum. We were still in that version. Mummies chasing people away Mummies chased workers at the museum away in order to extract 10,000-year-old rice from a sarcophagus to use the rice to refoliate Mars. The rice was being sought after by a new character, a fortune seeker Hennessy, who'd been tipped off about the seeds. Then there'd be backstory about where the sarcophagus had come from, how it ended up at the British Museum, that sort of thing. And so the Doctor, Brigadier Sarah, would get called in at the museum after mummy killing, the mummies after the rice, so the mummies killing the museum workers. And the history book says, with some misgivings, Holmes formally accepted the script. So right now it was still going ahead. But Holmes was saying the problems to Greifer. Lack of mummy movie trappings. So not really, Holmes wants to be playing off the mummy movie Hammer horror stuff, and that's not the vibe. Maybe Greifer was like Hinchcliffe and wasn't actually like a Hammer horror fan. Who knows?
I have to say, I'm loving this fixation on like grain and rice and stuff now. It's starting to endear itself to me. Because it just feels like one of those little things where just like some nerdy detail of like, hey, well, in ancient Egypt, they had this kind of plants and stuff. And just the idea of actually writing a whole story about that could kind of be fun, but it clearly wasn't the assignment that he'd been given.
Yeah. Holmes was gently suggesting focus more on the rocket stuff. At this moment, it's not called Sutekh yet. It's Sebek now. Sebek was a colonizer who'd been imprisoned by Horus, suspended animation. Like the Brigadier, apparently was going to end up in a Martian pyramid. Spaceship ran out of fuel, so there was going to be stuff with that. So Part 1 script was done. Holmes had accepted it. Parts 2, 3, 4 scripts were due in October, but Greifer got very sick, had to have an emergency operation, so he was not in a state to really submit the scripts. So those scripts didn't come through until later in November, and the scripts were not what Holmes and Hinchcliffe were after. The final episode didn't resolve the previous 3 episodes. The mummies and the pyramid stuff featured more prominently than the Doctor, and apparently all the mummy mythos stuff was handled weirdly. Hinchcliffe was kind of getting over the museum setting. Maybe things were still recoverable at this point, but Greifer, after he got better after his operation, he had to go teach in Israel, in Tel Aviv University, and so he had to go off. He had to leave the UK, go to Israel. So Holmes wrote to Greifer's wife saying, your husband's got to do a lot of work, but then his term teaching in Israel got extended, kind of getting to a time crunch status now. The scripts need to be ready, but Greifer is very busy in Israel. He's teaching, lots of stuff going on there. So Hinchcliffe and Holmes keep asking, can you fix these scripts? We really need these scripts. We can't quite use them in this way. You need to change them. And the Complete History book says, quote, Holmes suspected that Greifer had never seen an episode of Doctor Who before submitting his storyline, end quote. So apparently Greifer kept going on this idea of pyramid power. He kept that phrase. He wanted to work in elements about pyramid power so that, if things in a pyramid work differently. If you keep a razor blade under a pyramid, the razor will stay sharp forever. So pyramid power was a big thing that was in these scripts for some reason.
Maybe he actually believed in it, like a real thing.
I don't know. Come February 75, Greifer, his wife, his agent, Hinchcliffe, they're all talking together, but Greifer's still in Israel. The dates for filming are getting closer and closer. Looks like a really substantial rewrite is needed. Finally, Hinchcliffe rips the band-aid off, rips the mummy bandages off, and says the scripts aren't usable. We'll pay you, sure, but you might want to you have the option to remove your name from the finished product because we got to basically rewrite the whole thing very substantially. You'll get your money. You can take your name off if you want, and we need to do a new script. Well, Robert Holmes needs to do a new script. So Robert Holmes basically, everything we've just talked about doesn't really resemble the final story much at all. Robert Holmes basically, he writes Pyramids of Mars. But because, not screwing over Greifer, we're going to do a pseudonym. A fair few classic stories have a similar kind of thing where basically one guy writes the whole thing. Maybe another Gabriel Woolf story in Doctor Who has a very similar scenario where one writer basically wrote it all, but for certain reasons another writer's name ends up on it. But here, it's a pseudonym, Stephen Harris. Holmes comes up with basically everything we think of to do with Pyramids of Mars. Basically all comes from Robert Holmes, who writes all the stuff we now recognize as Pyramids of Mars. Yeah. What do you think of that?
I think Holmes does a great job with a poor lot that he was given. There are some kind of moments that I wonder whether were a result of a kind of hasty rewrite. Including, for example, the fact that Sarah Jane is kind of dressed in 1911 appropriate clothing. I think that's a really lovely scene. I think that's, as I mentioned, Ford kind of becomes like a senile old man, recounting previous companions. But there are a few kind of, moments like that where I wonder, was there something different in the original Greifer script? And perhaps not, but, I think that, the story that we ended up getting obviously became, is like, iconic and has, better or worse influenced the 2024 season. So I really like the story. I like it. It's a really fascinating history. Thank you for finding that.
Possibly one consequence of it having to be, I guess, written very kind of hastily at the last minute, or maybe not that last minute, but like maybe some aspect of that is reflected in the physical layout of the story, because it is all based kind of in this big priory place or in the little woods outside, and finally in that set with Sutekh and kind of in that kind of pyramid on Mars, which is kind of almost feels like the same room we go through multiple times with different things inside it. It feels quite small scale, but that broadly I think is to the story's benefit because it keeps things quite focused. And I think physically the structure of this story, rather than the Doctor being swept from location to location, all it is that we kind of get the layout of things pretty early on, because Sutekh has this plan to free himself that he's just executing in this house, in this place, and the Doctor tries various attempts to sabotage it, which kind of go wrong and then they go right, and then he ends up in Sutech's place. So it's kind of simple, but in that simplicity, that creates room to actually work on specifics, and the story is kind of about the Doctor using these specific tools, specific concepts, like a physical tricks, or like shooting a thing, or fucking with the barrier. All of these plots to actually try and derail this mechanical scheme that Sutech's laying out. So it's kind of concerned with the minutiae almost of just messing with this one little thing to blow up this rocket, rather than anything more abstract and airy like that. And that is thematically appropriate for the story that they're kind of telling, because it's all about, how would you use these tools to kind of mess with someone else who's also trying to use the tools, and also presenting that through the lens of superstition and supposed magic, which is in fact just very elaborate tools. So I guess it's holistic is the word. I guess Robert Holmes was kind of a master of taking what he had and finding or building the right story around those things where everything still works together.
It's also worth noting Patty Russell changed a lot as well when it came to filming. So she had a big influence on the stories it shaped up in the end as well. I kind of love these writers like Robert Holmes or RTD or Moffat fascinate me, where autopilot's the wrong word. It's like they know Doctor Who so well, they're able to like very, very quickly snap something into Doctor Who shape and often make it a really good story as well. In April, Hinchcliffe, it said he sent the Robert Holmes scripts to Greifer's wife, saying that your basic premise is here. The Mars stuff, the mummy stuff, the Egypt stuff, but these aren't really your scripts. So we get why you might not want your name on there. And that after this event, Hinchcliffe asked his boss, the head of serials, to make it so that to sanction Holmes writing up to 2 stories every season in his capacity as script editor, because he can do this really quickly, and probably pretty often there'll be writers that need to be, dealt with this way. So it's the exact same thing RTD and Moffat later do, and maybe Chibnall, I don't know. So it's they fascinate me, these writers that just seem to be able to magic Doctor Who into existence really quickly. Because like how Midnight was a very 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 last minute write. This story, the way we describe the production history there sounds kind of slapdash, but this is one of the most like beloved classic Who stories ever. And like we talked about for like 2 hours, this is really holistic. This is a really good story. I guess a lot of that probably comes from there was so much back and forth with Hinchcliffe, Holmes, and Greifer about, well, this doesn't work, well, this doesn't work. So I guess they were kind of almost unconsciously generating the story that will work by saying, if that doesn't work, if that doesn't work, if that doesn't work, what does work? So I guess it kind of was long in the gestation period that way, but still it's pretty impressive how quickly they can snap together stories that get remembered for 50 years. It's very impressive to me.
There's kind of a simplicity to it. I mean, not just in the way that already described with kind of it all being set in the house, but the way that all of these different elements that are happening around are kind of controlled by Sutekh from his base, his prism. Ultimately, where that leads is that, I mean, that wonderful bit where Sarah shoots the explosive and then it gets rewound. But then what we find out is that the actual, the explosion from that shot, it can't be stopped. And Sutekh is having to, like if you pull an elastic band and you hold it in place, it's got tension in it. And if you let go, it will ping back. The same thing is happening with that explosion. He is having to actually, because his brain, that character, that central villain, because his mind is having to run everything, like everything here, everything is linked to him. You can have a resolution as simple as the Doctor whispers something in Sutekh's ear and Sutekh turns his head like 2 degrees and then the explosion goes off. Which is like, I find that, I kind of laugh at that bit. It's really funny, but it's kind of it's a good way to make that plot work because it's deceptively simple. And it makes sense, and it allows us to have kind of an adventure that ties itself up in a way that it makes sense. It doesn't get lost in its own convolutions. So I guess just by linking everything to that central pillar, I guess that is Sutekh, that he's able to build out this storyline. I guess at the last minute, like he did at a very short notice, but have it not feel like a slapdash plot that's just going all over the place. It feels very tightly wound.
Are we ready to talk about the later iterations a bit, the bits from the novel and then the Tales of the TARDIS?
Yeah, sure.
And so we're going to go through some things from the novel and then from the 2024 revitalization of the story. So the novel, we already went through that flippancy line with Four's characterization. The novel, not written by Stephen Harris, Greifer, Holmes, written by Terrance Dicks in the Target line. It has like a new beginning and a new ending, which I want to talk about, but there's a bit in the middle, well, in chapter 5 that interests me. This is the thing that I said at the start of the discussion I've accidentally attributed to the episode before. So basically, conversation between Sarah and the Doctor. Sarah.
Egyptian mummies building a rocket, said Sarah skeptically. That's really crazy, Doctor. The Doctor smiled. Not really. Those aren't mummies at all. They're service robots. Robots? Then why do they look like mummies? The Osirians made them that way to keep the Egyptians in order, back in the days when they ruled as gods. All right then, persisted Sarah. Why are these robots building a rocket?
I think that's an interesting little thorn in some of the... It sounds like the Greifer versions of the story dealt a lot more with the ancient alien stuff. I think the final version we get is lighter on it, but it's still there that, The Doctor has that line about...
Well, I think that all of Egyptian culture is founded on the Osirian pattern. I think it's words to that effect.
Yes. Yeah. And so if you're taking the story straightforwardly on TV, it's that, stupid Egyptians, I don't know if it's necessarily calling them stupid, but it's real life Egyptians watching this story. All your gods are from, the spacey stuff, the Osirian aliens. These sorts of conversations get complicated because I think people quickly jump to, but there are so many Doctor Who stories where Odin or, whatever other Greek gods or Norse gods or whatever are also aliens. That happens all the time. Why is it weird to do it with Egyptians as well? I don't see anything insulting about that. I think the difference is, though, that...
Would you say it's context that kind of makes a difference a little bit? Because there's such a history of stuff like, especially with the ancient Egyptians in particular, this idea that, they couldn't possibly have made all that stuff. It must have been ancient aliens, or it must have been something else, or, there's no fucking way. How could all these people from these strange lands of the Orient ever possibly have scientific breakthroughs or engineering breakthroughs? It's impossible. This is a default skepticism. Or on the confluence, or the contrary, you might have the weird exoticization and kind of like elevation of them. This idea that they must have been some third thing. Rather than either us or foreigner, they must have been some secret third thing. This ancient, unreachable, hypothetical thing.
And also that a lot of these writers, we're hearing these writers have never even seen mummy films, let alone been to Egypt or whatever, which is fine. But it's a different relationship. When a English writer is writing about some god or mythology more closely associated with England, I feel like that's a slightly different thing than when you're writing Egyptian gods are from aliens versus when you're writing, I don't know, a more European god is associated with aliens. I don't love the ancient aliens things in the first place, no matter the god mythos, but I get why that's different. So the actual TV story itself is kind of more straightforward. Egypt stuff is based on aliens. The Osirians, the aliens, Egypt gods are based on those. That's how it works. But I think that little bit of the novel is interesting because it's kind of implicitly in the TV story is, I guess, why do the servitors look that way? Why are they in bandages? Was that from the Osirians, or was that from, why is that look, where did the look originate, the chicken or the egg? And I like that the novel says, well, that was an Egyptian thing, the mummy look. So the Osirians put their robots in bandages to fit in better with the Egyptian culture. I think that's interesting because it slightly complicates the matter more of influence. What do you think of the Terrance Dicks edition there?
Yeah, see, that feels like something that maybe writing the TV story, they didn't really give that much of a shit about. We're doing a mummy story, so let's have mummies in it, but they're robots, fine. And the question of, why is not necessarily broached so much. I mean, in the story on TV, we get a description of what the bandages are. They're chemically impregnated to guard against this and that. So it's not quite the same thing. So if you wanted to, if you weren't looking at the novelisation, just at the TV story, and you wanted to you could read that as the mummies are the basis for whatever the Egyptians were doing. But interestingly, in the novelisation version, what that is it's kind of reversed, and it's saying that the Osirians, in landing in ancient Egypt, in their pursuit of Sutekh or whatever, and doing all the stuff they were doing, they kind of had to do a bit of a... I don't know the details enough to say oppression so much, but a certain degree of control. They wanted to exercise a degree of manipulation of the locals, the people who lived there, the native people. And they did that by actually appropriating, I guess, ideas or cultural ideas, designs, imagery from that culture, and using that against them, kind of playing off, I guess, beliefs, fears. So they were kind of engaging with it in a way, kind of acknowledging it as a separate thing, and kind of using it. You could say abusing it in their own way. So there's kind of a note of it's just reflecting on the Osirians as a kind of an intrusive entity that is not just necessarily not necessarily a benevolent one.
The other interesting addition in the novel is there's a prologue and there's an epilogue of stuff that's not in the TV story. They're both a page and a half, so I'll just read them out to see what you think of them. The prologue is called The Legend of the Osirians, and so it reads:
Prologue, The Legend of the Osirians. In a galaxy unimaginably distant from ours, on a planet called Festa Osiris, there arose a race so powerful that they became like gods. As well as mastering technology and science, the Osirians developed powers of pure thought bending the physical world to their will by the strength of their minds alone. As they grew in power, so they grew in wisdom. All but one.
His name was Sutekh, and he was great among the Assyrians. But greater still was his brother Horus, whom all Assyrians called leader. All but Sutekh, who hated Horus and was jealous of him. The Assyrians spread throughout the galaxies of the cosmos. They ruled many worlds and were often worshipped as gods, but Sutekh stayed on Vesta Osiris, their home planet, working to develop his powers so that he might one day overthrow his brother Horus. The Assyrians were a long-lived race. Sutekh worked and studied for thousands of years until his powers were truly awe-inspiring, but his mind was full of jealousy and hatred, and in time this turned to madness. Overmastered by his own fears, Sutekh became convinced that not only the other Assyrians, but all sentient life was his mortal enemy. Not just the more intelligent life forms, but animals, reptiles, insects, plants. Sutekh hated them all. He feared that someday, somewhere, there might evolve a life form powerful enough to destroy him. An insane ambition formed in Sutekh's twisted mind. He would range through the galaxies and destroy all life until only he remained as unchallenged ruler. He became Sutekh the Destroyer, and he began by destroying his own planet. Leaving the shattered desolation of Vesta Osiris behind him, Sutekh blazed a trail of havoc across the cosmos, wrecking and smashing world after world with his titanic powers. Soon news of his madness reached fellow Assyrians. Led by Horus, they began the search for Sutekh, determined to destroy him. Tracking him by his trail of destruction, they hunted him across the cosmos. At last, Sutekh took refuge on an obscure planet called Earth, and here finally his fellow Assyrians found him. The battle was long and fierce, for Sutekh was a formidable opponent. 740 Assyrians came to Earth to combine against him before he was finally defeated and made captive in a land called Egypt. They brought him before his brother Horus for judgment. Many urged that all the Assyrians should link their minds and blast Sutekh from existence, but Horus would not agree. To kill Sutekh would mean that they too were destroyers. So Horus decreed that Sutekh should not die, but should be made eternally captive. A pyramid was built to become his prison, and since more than walls of stone were needed to imprison such a being as Sutekh, he was locked in the grip of a mighty force field, paralyzed and utterly helpless. For even greater safety, the control point of this force field was placed not on Earth, but on one of the other planets circling its sun. On Earth, a secret cult of Egyptian priests was set up to guard the pyramid. Satisfied that Sutekh was forever bound, Horus and the other Assyrians went on their way. What became of the Assyrians, no one can say. They vanished from our cosmos and were seen no more. On Earth, they left behind them legends of the all-powerful gods who fought wars among themselves. Deep inside the pyramid, Sutekh lived on for thousands upon thousands of years. He endured his long captivity.
Bound by the force field of Horus, scarcely able to move a muscle, only his twisted brain was active. It planned and plotted without cease, waiting for the day of his escape. For Horus would not leave even Sutekh quite without hope. He had told him that escape was possible, though the difficulties and obstacles were so great as to be almost insurmountable. The mighty civilization of Egypt rose and fell. Other civilizations and empires took its place. Sutekh and Horus and the Osirians were remembered only as a legend. Still, Sutekh waited in his hidden pyramid. Until one day... ...
And then it goes on to the start with Scarman.
Okay, I'm going to be honest, I think that was quite bad, to be honest. I think taking all of these things that are revealed gradually through the story and just dumping them on page one like that, in a way that feels quite prosaic, I'm just like, why? Why? Yeah, I get kind of the idea. This is a legend. This is kind of this cosmic, crazy, mythic history. So you kind of introduce it that way at the start of the book. But it just feels like you're actually undercutting it a little bit and just making it all so explicit and plain and just like flattening it out like that, like at the very start. Like it's like it's leaning into the mythos to the detriment of the mythos. It's taking away some of the magic there, I think, by just dumping it like that. I'm not a huge fan of opening the book that way.
In the Timeless Children, in the huge master monologue, there's a bit where he starts talking like they would restrict the regenerative process to a blah, 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 blah thing. And it's like the master is babbling out so much exposition that starts to just disconnect itself, and it's just like going and then. I get kind of that vibe here as well. I kind of like the idea of starting the book with like a spooky thing about the alien culture. I just feel like you could probably chop that, just keep the first page of it or something. I feel like it gets too specific when it's explaining everything.
Yeah.
In Egypt. Yeah, I'm also not a big fan.
Yes, it's just too expositional, isn't it? Like, then the Egyptian priests were set up to do this. Like, no one cares about that. Basically, I would say stylistically, if you're going to lead with like the mythos stuff like that, you want to make it feel a bit more mythic. Don't answer so many of our questions that soon. Keep it a little bit more vague if you're going to open the book like that, because we're on the start of the book, right? Leave some things to actually discover as the book progresses.
Yeah. The other big addition in the novelisation is an epilogue. I'll read this one out. I'm interested to see what you two think of it. So the epilogue reads:
Later, much later, when she finally arrived safely back on Earth after many adventures, Sarah remembered the doctor's words. She went to the offices of the local paper in the little country town near Unit HQ and persuaded them to let her see the files for 1911. Before long, she found the item she wanted.
Brothers die in tragic fire. Holocaust sweeps country estate. Many others feared killed. The whole countryside was shocked and saddened today by the news of the tragic fire at the old priory, in which a number of well-known local figures perished. Fire broke out, and suddenly during the night, and swept the priory, the lodge, and much of the heavily wooded estate at great speed. Among the victims of the blaze is believed to be Professor Marcus Scarman, the well-known Egyptologist who had just returned from a successful archaeological expedition to Egypt. His brother Laurence, the distinguished amateur scientist, also died in the flames. Further victims include Josiah Collins, who had been in the service of the Scarmans all his life, a Mr. Ibrahim Namin, believed to have been a guest of Professor Scarman, and a family friend, Dr. Warlock, who was visiting the priory. In the grounds, the remains were discovered of Ernest Clements, a local villager with a history of poaching. It is feared that this unfortunate man was trapped by the blaze while engaged in his nefarious pursuits. An element of mystery still surrounds the death of Professor Scarman himself. He had not been home for some time and was thought to be on his way back from Cairo. However, investigations in Cairo revealed that Professor Scarman had left some time ago. It is believed that the unfortunate professor, by an unlucky coincidence, must have returned to his ancestral home on the very night of the fire, though as yet no trace of his remains have been discovered. The cause of the ablaze is still unknown, but there is speculation in the village that one of the many advanced scientific devices which Mr. Laurence Scarman had installed in the lodge may somehow have been responsible.
Sarah skimmed through the rest of the report. So that was what the doctor had meant. The terrible events surrounding the return of Sutekh had found a natural explanation, a deplorable but soon forgotten tragedy in an English country village. Sarah looked through the window out into the bustling high street of the little country town. She shivered at the memory of the desolate world she had seen through the doors of the TARDIS, the world Sutekh would have made if he had not been defeated. The sacrifice of all those lives had not been in vain. The pity was that no one would ever know. Sarah closed the heavy old volume and went out into the summer sunshine of her own unchanged 20th century.
So that's how the book ends.
It does strike me as a kind of odd way to reframe those deaths at the end of the story, because it's kind of, in a way, it's almost like the author telling like the reader, well, those people died, but it was all for the greater good. Whereas it's like, that's just strikes me as kind of an odd way to look at them, because what does it necessarily add per se? It's not like any of them actually sacrificed their lives to stop Sutekh or whatever. Like it's kind of, stopping Sutekh. All the Doctor's plans to stop Sutekh got fucked up until the very end. So it's like, well, okay. Like, if Sutekh had known about the TARDIS from the very beginning, he'd have just, just done something with that, presumably, and not wasted all his time trying to build a rocket. So, yeah, anyway, it's weird to try and, put a gloss on the events of the story and kind of wrap them into a package that says, this is how you should look at them, in a way. Do you get what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's too neat, I find.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's kind of an easy way to sum up the events of the story, isn't it? To have it, especially a time travel story like this, to have a character come across old newspaper clippings and see them from her own life. I think what's maybe missing, maybe the reason that we're talking about these character deaths in this way is because they're framed in this way because this is the way that this newspaper has written this story, as opposed to this is my point. What I think was missing from this is Sarah Jane's own reflections on the story of her own. It's all well and good to have Sarah reading newspaper clippings, and maybe this is the result of Dicks being a screenwriter. It it would work fine on screen to see a character reading headlines and pieces of an article and not necessarily hearing their thoughts. But what this kind of lacks is the novelistic approach to what a character is thinking about what they're seeing. So the fact that we don't hear, beyond Sarah Jane's feeling that Earth could have been destroyed, we don't really see what she has to say, what she thinks about these character deaths, or the way that the story is framed by the newspaper that doesn't ultimately understand the events of the story.
Yeah, Dick seems more concerned with the facts of the case. The fact that this whole story got summed up in the media as a tragedy, an accident, rather than Sarah's own emotional landscape. Because he's so remembering the desolate world of the 20th century, and that, well, that's not happened, so that's good. But that's a very simplistic kind of observation, isn't it? I mean, anyone would feel the same way. Like, any companion would probably think the same thing in those broad terms if they were in that situation at that moment. We don't really get much of it through Sarah's individual point of view, I guess the thing. And maybe that is something like of a broader thing with Dicks's, I guess, novelizations, or maybe even like writing, certainly novelizations. This idea that maybe we're doing a bit too much of a prosaic, just here are the facts of this story, or that this is like, here is like the bare bones, like skeletal, like essence of this story, rather than this is a real psychological dive on these characters.
So that was one revision of the story, the novel. The big, the story's been rebroadcast a lot, like I mentioned earlier. It's had very good ratings in its repeats, in slightly cut down versions and that sort of thing. The big cut down version we're familiar with today is the 2024 Benjamin Cook Tales of the TARDIS edit, which cuts the story down to about 76 minutes, 75 minutes.
Yes, thereabouts.
Which is a fair, because it's 4 25-minute episodes originally. So that's a fair cut down, especially when you're considering there's wraparound scenes. That's the conceit of Tales of the TARDIS is, well, the first 6 were like, the ones for the 60th anniversary were omnibus cuts of classic serials. So they're not cutting anything besides like, making the ends and starts of episodes sync up right. Then there's wraparound scenes with the old actors, or some old actors anyway, kind of discussing the serial, and then you go on to watch the serial, and the old actors in character discuss the story again. Cute concepts. I thought some of them were pretty good for Tales of the TARDIS with the 60th anniversary, those 6 ones. Nice idea, but those were just omnibus versions with some, old actors talking in character at the start and the end. This is a whole different beast, which is like the Daleks in Colour, which Ben Cook did for the 60th. This is an actual re-edit. It's not a simple re-edit. It's like, to actually go and track everything that's been changed would be Herculean, because so many scenes have just had little slight adjustments, so many little changes, little things with the music, it's a whole big proper re-edit that Benjamin Cook has done, basically. There's new music from Sam Watts in the Shooty and Millie scenes at the start and the end. And so the idea of it, kind of where this comes from is, well, in 2020, there was a Doctor Who magazine where Russell and Moffat interviewed each other. And something Russell said in there was, I wish, with the hindsight of 2020, I'd done a great big proper sequel to a classic story. I'd have run the old episodes on BBC 3 all week, then shown the sequel on the Saturday. And that's kind of what he did with Pyramids of Mars here, because the season 1 penultimate episode, the 2024 season 1 penultimate episode, The Legend of Ruby Sunday, sets up Sutekh as a returning villain. And then in between that and the actual finale, Empire of Death, this Benjamin Cook Pyramids of Mars edit aired. And then we got Empire of Death with Sutekh again as a big villain after that. So that was kind of Russell doing his big idea. What do you think of that idea of set up a classic villain returning, repeat the old story, then do another story? RTD's 2020 idea. What do you think of that concept?
That's just the bare bones of a story, isn't it? That's like the formula of the way that you can tell a story in Doctor Who, which is it could be a good idea or it could be a bad idea, because that's not the idea itself. That's the structure of the way that you can tell a story like this, as opposed to the actual story. And as we've seen, the actual storytelling of the way that you can use this structure can be told poorly, and unfortunately was.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not inherently a good idea or an idea at all. I think the danger almost in as cute as that sounds, like, hey, we can re-air a classic story and do the sequel to the classic story. Well, it obscures the fact that doing a sequel to a classic Who story is not an end in itself. It's not necessarily a good idea in itself. And in putting so much focus on that almost fetishistic pleasure of doing that sequel to a classic Who story, you're almost setting yourself up for doom, to be honest. Because if you're kind of like worshipping or wanking kind of classic Who that much, like, how likely are you to even write a fitting sequel or justified follow-up to that story? So it's not that great of an idea, but I think the basic essence of it is we want to make classic Who, we want to give classic Who its flowers, we want to rebroadcast classic Who, get more people watching classic Who, use the new series as kind of a device to turn people on to classic Who in some ways, which, again, kind of maybe a questionable use of the new series, but nonetheless, it is bound in a desire to get people to materially watch classic Who and actually watch it, not just have opinions about it without watching it or dismiss it out of hand, but have a reason to literally watch Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen on screen doing that stuff, watch that dialogue written by Robert Holmes. So there is like a respectable quality to it, because that's a real bit of TV that was made, and yeah, it's good, people should watch it. So I understand like the desires there. I also think that it might have been better to think of them as part of a more cohesive, holistic whole. Like, you want to tell a good news story as well at the same time.
So, before talking about the additions, like the 15th Doctor, Ruby Sunday stuff, I know, Gig, you've watched it in full. What do you think of the actual slim downs, the actual edits? Like, the meat and potatoes of this recut is, it's not that he's just cut out certain scenes and sequences, it's that he's done a lot of slimming down of lots of scenes in little minute ways. How did that flow for you?
Well, first thing to bring up is that earlier on you mentioned the Daleks in colour, which aired like last year, kind of late 2023, as part of the whole thing, and that was obviously edited by Ben Cook, but it's very, very different to this. The approach taken is like night and day, I think, because the Daleks is from an even older era of Doctor Who. It's a much longer story. It's kind of working in slightly less familiar ways. So that edit of that story, in turning that into a feature-length thing, there's lots of remixing done, lots of kind of crazy techniques done with... it's almost over-ambitious, I think, Ben Cook with that one, with like flashbacks and all kinds of things. There's a completely new score by like a McCoy-era composer that kind of gets cheeky with fucking with genre and stuff. So it's this very weird new beast. This one with Pyramids of Mars feels... not like a reaction against that one, but it's consciously it's being more faithful. I think part of that is that what it's working with source material-wise is already, it doesn't need a lot of changing, really, to play to new audiences. Like, Tom Baker and Sarah Jane, like, what's happening in that Hinchcliffe era is already very familiar to modern audiences of Who, because so much of that is an influence on the new series. So there isn't really an impetus to change anywhere near as much. And I think the edit that we get here is probably is very coherent. It doesn't feel like you're watching a story that's had lots of stuff chopped out of it. It doesn't feel rushed. Like, he keeps small moments, like small cute moments, like when the Doctor and Sarah walk into a room in the final series of pyramid rooms in part 4, and then immediately spin around 180 degrees and walk out again before the mummy can see them, and then they come back in. Like, little bits like that are kept, but at the same time, small things that are kind of good get lost as well. So, for example, in the Doctor and Sutekh's face-off in part 4, in the original version of the story, there's a brief moment where, when the Doctor identifies the planet he's from, Sutekh doesn't recognise what planet that is. He's like, okay, names mean nothing, give me the coordinates so I can look it up on my computer, and then we'll see whether I give a shit about you or not, right? In this edited version, because we're kind of cutting for time, that bit is removed, and Sutekh recognises the planet immediately. You're a Time Lord, okay. And it's kind of a shame to lose that, because that's kind of one of those little details that plants Sutekh, it locates Sutekh and what he actually is, which is that he doesn't have a reason to instantly recognise Gallifrey or give that much of a shit about Time Lords. They're an annoyance to him. He barely remembers them. And that is important for the sense of scale at work in the story. So when you lose small things like that, you kind of lose kind of part of the character of the story a little bit. Again, it's not like a massive, like, fatal thing. This is a small thing. And like another small thing that we lose is later on in that whole conversation, when Sutekh is trying to needle the Doctor about his relationship to Sarah, and the Doctor kind of changes the subject. He's like, "Oh, you're just scared that other life will challenge you, be more powerful than you. You're insecure." And Sutekh's like, "Your argument is a cloud, Doctor, but I see through it." That bit is kind of lost again. Instead, we go straight from we kind of lose that bit from the Doctor there, and we go straight from I just travel with I just care about humans because all humans are our kith, and we go straight from that to Sutekh being like, oh, your argument is a cloud, Doctor. So again, it's just small nuances of Sutech's characterization or approaches to him that we kind of lose, but on the whole, it doesn't actually feel like across the whole story. It doesn't feel like we've lost much of its like essence there. Like there's still lots of bumming around in the forest with like the mummies and stuff. Like that stuff's still there. So it kind of does feel like it does feel pretty coherent. It doesn't feel like we've lost like much of like massive. It works as a story, as a translation of the story into a shortened form. Like, I would not say watch this instead or anything like that, but it is certainly as just a recap of the story that still feels like you're getting the core of it. I would say it works quite well.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I really missed those moments of this insecurity moment I really like about Sutech's characterization. And I love that Gallifrey thing that he doesn't recognize. It makes the universe feel so much bigger. So I was sore about losing those, but I thought it just flowed really well. I thought it was really well done. I don't think you can see the seams in a lot of it. I think it feels really thought through. I think Ben Cook did a really good job by and large. Something about it that interested me heaps is, so Sam Watts, the Sarah Jane Adventures composer, did new music for the Shooty and Millie scenes, and I really like how he blended it into the actual score, the Dudley Simpson score in the actual episode. But like New Who is drenched in music, like Murray Gold, it's a constant. It's a titanic dredge of music all across New Who. That's how a lot of TV works now, is constant music. I thought it was really interesting that Ben Cook like layered a lot more music in scenes of Pyramids of Mars that weren't originally scored like that. So a lot of it was, he wasn't just using the original Dudley Simpson score. Some of it was there was a soundtrack album from the 90s where Heathcliff Blair re-recorded some of Dudley Simpson's score for stories like Pyramids of Mars. So some of that 90s soundtrack album, like redoing music from Pyramids, was used in this Tales of the TARDIS new version of Pyramids to like add even more music to like different scenes. I thought that was really interesting and really cool. And I like the Sam Watts, the way it blended in. It's a very, 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 very music heavy version of Classic Who, which makes it feel more like New Who to me, to have so much music blaring on and telling you how to feel. That sounds like I'm insulting it, but it's not. I like that. that works for me. What do you guys think of the music changes? Did you notice also the musical gag of Logopolis music playing when the radio telescope's first unveiled? I thought that was funny. It's just a much more musical version of the story. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's cool to do that with keeping the musical style of the story, but increasing it. That is actually quite nifty. Whereas with the Daleks, they do a similar music thing, but it's with changing the style of the music and actually making it quite unfamiliar and kind of almost more New Who-esque or slightly more McCoy-esque in that vein. With this one, actually using that old 90s soundtrack album to just build out the music that's already there. That's quite clever. And I like that. That's a really cool idea. Admittedly, I'm not entirely sure that Classic Who even actually needs stuff like that, but if you're going to do it, why not? You might as well try, have fun with it at least.
I guess the thing is, it's not a Star Wars situation because it's easier than ever to watch the old Pyramids of Mars. It's on iPlayer. It's very easy to access the old one.
Although I would point out that the subtitles on the iPlayer ones are quite fucked in a lot of places, because it seems like they have to do a new round of subtitles and they're wrong in all kinds of locations. Lots of misheard, mistranscribed words. It's really strange. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
I wonder if there's some legal or copyright thing with not using the home release.
I think almost certainly there is probably some legal thing that they can't use the good subtitles, which is a shame.
But this is part of why I don't mind the CGI versions like the DVDs or the collection do of Classic Who stories as well, because no one's trying to George Lucas the originals away, really. So I think it's interesting to do these kind of New Who inspired versions in some ways. You mentioned no one's trying to George Lucas them away, but there is one change in the with CGI in the story in this edit that does feel a little bit to me like someone, not the original creator trying to rewrite history, but someone else trying to rewrite history a little bit. Because one edit in this story, one of the CGI changes, is that the time corridor effect of Sutekh coming through his little tunnel, or the things generally coming through that tunnel from the pyramid in Egypt to the Priory in the UK, they changed the effect of that into, of course we complain about this in our Empire of Death discussion, they changed that to the time vortex from 2023. And that is all part of this weird, fucked up interpretation that RTD has, or had, when he was a teenager,
watching this, which is that, I guess Sutekh was coming through the time vortex, and at the end of the story, Sutekh got sent back into the time vortex, and that's how Empire of Death can happen, because Sutekh, he jumped on the blah, 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 and all this really shitty shit with that story that's going on there. So it's kind of annoying to me that they changed the story they actually kind of changed they try to imply something empirically different about what's happening in this story, Pyramids. With that one CGI edit, they try to imply that the corridor is actually just the time vortex that the TARDIS travels through, which is not actually the story that Robert Holmes was telling. So I don't really like that, because I think of that as more of a Lucasy thing, because it's in service of trying to change, of trying to do a story built off of that later on. But again, it's like you say, it's not actually fucking up with the original. It's not actually fucking the original. It's not changing the dialogue of the original. It's not ruining or getting rid of or replacing the original. So it's not that big of a deal.
It's just quite disingenuous, isn't it? It's retconning an old story to kind of fit with the misremembered. Because I think you're right. I think that's what it is. I don't think that it's RTD, imposing like a new viewpoint on an old story. I do believe it's a misremembered thing. That I believe him. I take him at his word when he says that he's had this idea in his head for 50 odd years. And I think this just comes from an attempt to skew the perception of the intent of the old story, which is so much better than this kind of fan monkey kind of lore based crap.
Yeah, another VFX change. I like this one was in dog jackal head mode. Sutekh towards the end when he's talking to the Doctor from the time corridor / I guess time vortex in this version, they've kind of done a little change to kind of wobble him around or animate him a little, and they've also reframed him to be kind of further away from we see more of his body now basically versus the original version. I actually thought that worked quite well. What do you guys think of that? I thought that was an improvement.
Yeah, I would say watching the original now, he kind of seems really the sense of scale is a bit strange, and
it's too close and doesn't move.
It doesn't really match up with how other things and people have come through that time corridor. It's how can he be in close up here? That makes no sense. You see the seams too much in that version, so they've tried to sort that out, and that's pretty good. There is another a very subtle VFX thing I think was added by Ben Cook, because I watched the original on iPlayer just now and it's not in it. When the poacher guy comes to the deflection barrier, that's kind of this invisible wall, when he kind of bumps into it and then kind of tests it, in the original Classic Who serial, there's just a sound effect to kind of indicate that he's bumping against something. It's funny, woo, or he throws a stick at it and it bounces off. I think what they actually did in the edit, I don't think I'm imagining this, it's a very subtle thing. When he bumps into it, there's a slight, couple of frames of distortion. When he bangs into it, the frame goes, woo, it kind of warps a little bit, just to visually show that actually, something's visually happened, as well as the sound effect. So I kind of like the small touch of watching that, because the thing is, I watched that new edit before I went back and rewatched the original serial. So I kind of, when that happened in the edit, I was like, wait, is that any original? Because if it was, that was really cool. And then it isn't. so yeah, I liked that. Just small touches like that. It's a labour of love, is this.
The other big addition is with the wraparound scenes. So they're kind of set during the finale, Empire of Death, where there's kind of some hangout time where the Doctor and companion are in the memory TARDIS that all the tales of the TARDIS are set in. When they kind of, I think Mel's meant to be there just off screen, sleeping, but they're just in there kind of chilling out, warming their hands on Jodie Whittaker's TARDIS, having a little discussion about Sutekh's so scary. And so 15 opens the Tales of the TARDIS Ben Cook re-edit by saying, I fought Sutekh a long time ago in the summer of 1911, deep in the English countryside. Ruby says, but you beat him, you won. 15 says, by the skin of my teeth, I don't think I could do that again. Ruby asks what happened. 15 says, I was a different man back then. I don't think you would have recognized me. I traveled with this amazing friend like you. Her name was Sarah Jane Smith, and we had some good times. But no, the story doesn't start in Britain. It starts halfway across the world in Egypt, where an Englishman was looting the tombs of the pharaohs and disturbing the dead. What do you think of that new introduction for the story?
I would say on the whole, it's kind of doesn't have a massive amount of identity to it in terms of just kind of the Doctor just doing the generic, I guess, Doctor Who fan descriptions of things an amazing companion and we had such adventures and blah, blah, blah. There is one interesting note at the end there. In terms of RTD seems quite conscious of how he's framing the Egyptology stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, in Empire of Death itself, we get a line kind of sassily kind of hand-waving all of that. But and here it's a bit different. We get just the way he describes, he's disturbing the dead, he's looting, what was the word? The tombs, something like that. It just seems like he wants to try and nod to the fact that actually not everyone necessarily supports what Professor Scarman is doing here. Like, certainly in 2024, maybe people's opinions of that might have changed. So that's kind of an amusing thing to note there.
I like it because, I like it because, obviously, I agree with it in a kind of ideological sense, but also because there have been a few instances, a couple in Empire of Death, Legend of Rupert Sunday, but also a couple in throughout season 1 of instances where the Doctor kind of openly voices a disdain for. 73 yards. He literally steps on on like a cultural kind of symbol, and it causes a lot of problems. And he's and it's kind of the whole idea of that is that was a misjudgment and a sign of disrespect on the Doctor's part. So I guess we're moving towards a kind of a better ideological landscape for Doctor Who, and it kind of signifies that it signifies a difference between what Doctor Who was doing and saying in 1975 about history and the British kind of imposition of history, as opposed to what Doctor Who was saying about history now.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because, I mean, in a way, because we talk about, I guess, an Egyptologist and archaeologist, explorers, from kind of the imperial metropole going to Egypt to dig around in the tombs and stuff, but also part of that whole explorer archetype is the Doctor, because depending on what interpretation of the show you're in, that's kind of what the Doctor does as well. He, dips his nose into other people's places and cultures and kind of goes exploring in other people's tombs and places and all kinds of things. Obviously, he doesn't steal things and put them in a museum, and he doesn't bomb entire populations or anything like that, or subject them to military occupation or anything like that. But certainly there are links there. The Doctor kind of grows out of some of those traditions as a character. So I guess part of trying to spin that to more benevolent ends is to put emphasis on this idea of respecting the places he goes to. So visiting as a respectful participant in or observer of the many cultures and regions of the world, rather than someone who goes in and takes them for his own ends, or just asserts dominance over other people's worlds. So there's a conscious kind of shift in emphasis there, and I think it's broadly quite a good one.
The other Ruby 15 scene there's only two, is at the end. So I love the aspect ratio changes Tales does as well. So we start in widescreen, and then we it doesn't just cut to the old square ratio, it morphs into it, which is cool to watch. So at the end, the ratio expands back out more rectangular. We go back to the memory TARDIS, Ruby in 15. Ruby says, but Sutekh survived, and the Doctor says, I thought he was dead, but he was just waiting. Ruby says, you fought him, you defeated him, you've got to know something we can use against him. And then 15 is this very strange, I actually think laughable bit of dialogue where he says, that Sutekh was the size of a man. He's now evolved into a titan. How do I fight that? And Ruby says, and if you don't, they go on, it's the end of the universe. What do I do? Is it just me, or is that insanely constraining and ridiculous and small to be Sutekh used to be small, but now he's big?
It's so in the vein of what RTD kind of sees storytelling as, because I think probably what the events that transpired here were, obviously this is recorded much later than Empire of Death was recorded, and I think there was a realization that there was no discussion about why Sutekh looks different now, and I think RTD's got this kind of he's got this kind of fanish impulse to explain everything, and maybe you could call it producer brain, maybe you could call it fan brain, maybe it's a inflation of the two. But I think it comes from that need to explain why Sutekh looks different now, and also I think part of the inherent problem of Lost Two Days that lines of dialogue don't really seem to be revised.
There's a tension almost, isn't there, in actually bringing back Sutekh but making him really big. and then broadcasting the original story, which is really great, but Sutekh is, quite normal sized because his strength does not actually derive from his physical size, but rather from his mental power, his ingenuity, his resourcefulness, his sheer malevolence in a lot of ways. So there's kind of like in kind of acknowledging the fact that in acknowledging this change of size at all, it's kind of skirting away from almost like this weird hollowness in trying to make him huge, like that matters. So it's like trying to make the fact he's huge, like, signify anything. It's kind of almost like having to confront the fact that really it doesn't. You haven't actually engaged with what made Sutekh a good villain in having him come back as a massive thing, in giving him a size upgrade, expand size, scale up. It's not really got anything to do with Sutekh. So it's very strange to kind of put emphasis on that like it counts.
The only other thing I really feel like we haven't talked about, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's more things you guys can think of, but Dudley Simpson's score. What do you think of the music for Pyramids of Mars?
There's lots of really cool and distinctive like sound design and musical design. One that I really love, I guess it's like the first time something's coming through the time corridor. So end of episode 1, when Scarman in his suit is kind of warping through the time corridor, and like I guess there's this organ slam, like, brrr, but then it starts to pitch up, like, brrr, like it's just really nauseating kind of. The use of the organ there, I think, is really cool.
You are here.
And the sound effects that come in during that, there's something quite overwhelming about it. It's sort of like a sonic attack a little bit. So I guess I like this sort of head spinning, sort of nauseous mania that kind of comes in dramatically with the music.
Tyler, what do you think of the score?
The original score is brilliant. Yeah, really great. There's so much, so many memorable pieces of music from that score. I think I mentioned earlier that there's a great moment where Doctor and Sarah Jane are skulking around outside the Priory, and there's a lovely bit of music scoring that. But yeah, the organ is really, really memorable. Yeah, that sound. I was really hoping that Murray Gold would riff on that in 2024. Sadly, we did not. Yeah, all of the Sutekh stuff is so amazing. Yeah, really memorable music.
I like there's a proper texture to the score here. It's the organ stuff. It just feels associated. I can feel like direct links. Organ, kind of old-fashioned horror. The Gothic Hinchcliffe stuff, it all just kind of coheres together nicely, and it's that music we both wanted reprised. It was never going to happen, but we both wanted reprised by Murray Gold. It's very iconic, and I love that it's textual. It's in the actual, that Ibrahim's actually playing like the evil Sutekh music on the organ in the actual episode. That's just really fun. That's bringing the music into the storytelling in a fun way, and I like that Heathcliff Blair 90s album that like does the music again. I like that. So it was really trippy to hear like it actually put into the episodes itself, like that later revised version of the music. So it's one of those classic Who scores I actually sometimes listen to outside of, watching the episodes, which I only really do that for McCoy stories generally, but I quite like this score. It's iconic. You can actually remember the score free of the episodes themselves. Yeah, it's a good one.
I think it feels like the score is responding to the fact that this is an slightly unusual story in terms of stakes, and in terms of having being situated around something that is so significant in terms of like the sheer like scale of the threat it poses, like the emotional state that the Doctor is in, and having to deal with something that is much more dangerous and horrific than he's used to. So it feels like in terms of the motifs that it brings back, just the sonic landscape. There is just there's an emphasis on building up this feeling of doom, just this crushing doom that is kind of like marching kind of relentlessly like at various points in the story.
Yeah,
that's a great point. There's a lot of harmony in this story. It feels like everybody involved in it's kind of working in tandem. It creates something really wonderful. I think I've mentioned I think all of the actors, all the cast of this story are wonderful and do bring great things to the story. I think it's a great script, and I think that the score underlines it all very well. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things came together to make this what it is.
Any other final thoughts
regarding the whole like rationalism versus science thing? I guess, and please stop me if I actually already said this and I just forgot. But the way the story kind of ends with the ultimate, I guess, the triumph of the Doctor's like scientific principles, scientific understanding, and materialist principles.
Yeah. Over,
I guess, the realm of like Sutekh and the Osirans, and kind of like that triumphing over paranoia or superstition, stuff like that. And I just in terms of thinking about those things, like through like the whole genre of the mummy curse that we kind of brought up earlier, and how that reflects kind of concerns of kind of imperial concerns about the places we go to, kind of coming back to attack us and such and such and such. Like, what if these ancient savage cultures actually had dangerous magics and they could come and like fucking curse us and shit? And what if they were horrible? What if all of that should have stayed buried? What if we should never have involved ourselves with all of these people because they're actually dangerous, and these evil priests from these freakish countries are going to come back and kill Englishmen and all of that? And if all of that is kind of like the basis for that sort of genre of kind of mummy story, like, could it be in a way that in having rationalism and imperialism triumph and actually kind of demystify all of that in this story, through the Doctor kind of solving kind of the crisis with Sutekh, through the Osirans actually not being gods per se, but rather incredibly advanced scientists, aliens, and having the Doctor kind of, through having the realm of science win and dominate in a way, is that in its own way conceivably kind of suggesting a slightly alternative relationship to the one that is kind of expressed through the whole kind of mummy paranoia? Could it be said to, maybe this is too generous, but maybe could it be said to kind of suggest, it just hooks into something that you said earlier in this discussion, Neo, about how we are all bound by the same rules. So we are all governed by the same laws of time and space, whether here, there, Osiran, human, Time Lord. In a way, is it almost, this feels ridiculous, is it almost in its own way subtly a little bit not quite fully on board with imperialism? Because imperialism in a way is kind of saying that we're not all beholden to the same rules, that actually some societies have more rights to rule or to dominate or to plunder or to take or to dominate than others. And if we're saying that actually the science, the empirical world, the rational world of maths and numbers is telling us that there aren't superstitious, dangerous, savage magics at play, that these are just human beings, we are just human beings, and these Siren gods are just, people with very powerful science, is it saying in a way that actually, we don't have the, we don't have the superiority that we delude ourselves that we have, that actually the rationalism is suggesting to us that these power dynamics are not right, and that, the proper relationship, the more fact-based relationship that we ought to have, is one where we can look at these things with clear eyes, and we can look at all these different places in the world as kind of equal in a way, and not, that we shouldn't have this kind of racist, often, kind of a point of view towards the various societies in the world. Do you feel that any of that, in the slightest sense, is kind of exists in even granular way through this story, and what Robert Holmes is kind of doing in this genre mix-up? Not necessarily intentionally, because it could be by complete accident, but do you think there's a germ of that in this story, do you think? Do you think you can take that from this story in any way?
Yeah. That's really, That's very well said. I think that's a really fascinating read.
Yeah, I think you've made it quite wonderful.
Yeah, it's just kind of a fun thing that preoccupied me, like in kind of researching for this discussion. It's kind of like, well, you can kind of look at it that way, can't you? It kind of stuck out to me.
If it's like dismantling faith and you pushing like this kind of material aspect over it, yeah, if you follow that through to a logical conclusion, it's dismantling other ideologies at play in the episode itself. I think it's a really curious way to extend it. I wish when we got further revisions of the story, whether it's through, these wraparounds or edits or sequel stories, that had been engaged with more, because that's a really curious way to kind of extend the ideology of the episode, maybe further than Holmes was actually thinking of, but it does actually evolve, I think, cohesively out of the text. That's so interesting. I wish something had been done with that beyond us ruminating on it. That's really fascinating. I love that reading. Yeah.
I think more than once in Classic Who, what you get is that when the story is kind of taking, I guess, cliches or genres and stuff from elsewhere and kind of infusing them with Doctor Who, you get, like, maybe unintentionally, you get this working together where it arrives implicitly almost, that you at conclusions you can take forward, that, like, if you revisited them, like, decades and decades later, maybe a different voice or a newer voice or a more recent voice would look at that and think, like, well, actually, this is actually saying something, like, really interesting and actually really, maybe even in some places a bit radical or maybe counter to what the writers or producers were thinking, but something that actually has more resonance maybe than it ever maybe was intended to have originally. Something that just by mixing these things together, they spark off each other in ways that have unexpected results. I think that's a really cool thing that sometimes you get in Classic Who.
What you've all just heard was recorded about 2 months after Empire of Death aired in 2024 between myself and Gig and Tyler. About a year and a few months after that came out a Blu-ray set for season 13 of Tom Baker's Doctor Who, the season with Pyramids of Mars on it. And now we're forward in time again. We're in early May 2026 here, so about a year and 2/3 after we recorded that first discussion. But we've come across, I think, quite an organic little evolution of the last 5 minutes or so of that discussion. Would you agree, Gig?
Yeah, I think a lot of the themes that we cover, well, certainly that I babbled about in those last 5 minutes, maybe you can draw connections, however ephemeral, between that and some of the stuff that's happened to this story, I guess, in 2025.
Yeah, so you made a dissatisfied noise at one point in the discussion when I talked about no one George Lucasing the old episodes, because you quite rightly pointed out that Russell T Davies was, pushing his odd headcanon about the time corridor Sutekh stuff in his 2024 Tales of the TARDIS thing. And Tyler didn't love that. He found it quite disingenuous and a bit like a retcon. But hey, the originals are still there. And I guess the originals, you can still get a Pyramids of Mars VHS if you consider that an original. I mean, what is the original? It was the original when it actually came out on the airwaves in 1975. We could get very deep with this. But I think that all came much more in vogue because what we're both swirling around here is that that Blu-ray set in 2025 used a lot of AI wizardry that made it look very weird and different to the original Pyramids of Mars. And I think that just interacts very interestingly with some of the archaeology stuff or cultural differences stuff, even some of the science versus God stuff, even some of the Egyptian Gothic stuff. But I think whenever you bring up this AI stuff, a lot of people are quick to, well, everything uses AI. So it's all AI, or AI all the way down. And I think people have very different definitions of this term. I think we've kind of lost some ground on what this term is going to be. I think we discussed this in our Moffat AI discussion as well. But like, I don't know about you, but I hear people use AI to mean CGI now, or there's I see only a very small set of people have any separation between like machine learning or like generative AI versus like old, there's a difference between sorting out the edge of a pixel on like the border of a frame versus like what's going on here, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the term like generative AI has always rang like bullshit to me whenever I hear it. Like generative as opposed to what? It just seems like I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but it just feels like all of the language around AI has basically been layers upon layers of different types of bullshit, basically. People talking around the concept rather than digging into what is literally going on. And it's a marketing term, I guess, at the end of the day, and that's what it is.
And I like, people will bring up Vidfire and all these other things done to Doctor Who episodes, and well, if you like that, how you have to like this. This has to look good to you because you liked how a DVD looked 20 years ago. Or whatever, and every copy of something has some level of, if not, well, I would call it degradation, I guess, but change. You know, we're not on a 1970s TV watching the broadcast of everything is different. Yes, I will completely. It's not even conceding that. I happily agree to that, and every version is different, and blah 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 blah. But as I think we got into the Moffat one, there's a whole lot of words and bullshit there to kind of, I think, obfuscate the fact that some things look good and some things look bad.
Yeah, I think restoration as a concept, I think throughout history, you're never actually obviously in some cases where you have the original film reel and you can scan it again, you can maybe get closer in some ways to what was captured like, materially. But throughout history, a lot of other forms of restoration, even including like literal paintings, you'll have had someone literally painting in a bit of the painting that got destroyed, right? So it's a different artist kind of filling in the gap. So rather than necessarily bringing back the original, you are substituting sort of a replacement for the original. So that has been a part of the concept of restoration for a very long time. That's a pretty normal thing. But, I mean, on one hand, of course, you do have generally humans involved with that. But again, like, it's not something you can always pretend that you're truly getting closer to the original necessarily. But the difference now, I think, is that there's this strange sort of perception when it comes to AI stuff and AI restoration or rescaling of adjustments of stuff, where it seems to have this imaginary, superficial veneer of superiority purely because like a computer has done it almost. Like it seems people almost seem to more willing to embrace the stuff because it's AI. Like that gives it some measure of truthfulness or like importance versus restoring it some other way, or even when what is happening is still basically just replacing the original with like a newly mashed together kind of invention, fabrication. It
reminds me a bit of Russell T Davies' Dark Season from way back in the day, where it's just it's computer, therefore it's good. Like we're smuggling things into computers now, therefore it has to be good because it came out of a computer. But I think where we're getting here is archaeology, I think, flows kind of naturally out of these conversations. But I think people try and get you in this big swirl and whirlpool of like it's new, or it's even if you don't think it looks good, the fact it's newer means it's some sort of progression or whatever, and you can't disagree because there is no perfect thing, because the VHS looked this way and the script looked this way and it all looked different things. But I just feel like it's this very odd like narrative shift I think it's just to cover everyone's eyes from the fact that if we look at a screenshot from the DVD, yes, it looks better than a screenshot from the new like AI tinkered with version of it. Like that looks worse in the Blu-ray. Like I don't think someone can argue in good faith that looks better. No, that looks worse. That doesn't look right. That doesn't look like what the story is doing. Or like the yassified Sarah Jane, like I guess that looks better if you have a very strange kind of aesthetic sense, but realistically it looks worse, right? And I feel like people want to vomit all these sorts of words over you to obfuscate the, I think, obvious for both of us actually facts that it looks worse, not better. Yeah, I think it's just this idea that because it looks smoother in some sort of abstract sense, or just in a general sense, it has this smoothness, that because it has lost, I guess, the visual artifacts of being either on videotape or on old film or just being old in some way, and it just looks glossy, then that is somehow like a smoother experience or a more visually impressive experience. And I think it's because it's more about, it's less about what it actually looks like and how good it looks and how good the people look, than it is about what it's suggesting by being smooth. Like it's almost like by looking very smooth, it creates this imaginary impression of being advanced and really beautiful and interesting. I think that kind of hooks into a lot of the, I guess, the fetishism of AI stuff generally. Like, oh wow, look at all these amazing AI pics, and they look kind of crap, but because they have this weird, like, artificial sheen to them, that almost gives them this imaginary mystique, like this technological sort of aura to them that they have. I do think a lot of it is weirdly magical thinking.
which I think also ties into Pyramids of Mars a little bit. Like this investment of like, you know, the Assyrians with like this godlike religious power. Yeah, I think people are sort of getting sucked into the weeds with this. I don't know, just investing importance that's not there.
Yeah, I think the way you ended the original discussion where we were talking about the hope of finding resonances with like further reinventions of Classic Who and stories like this, I think it's ironic that we found like a set of negative resonances here. But I think what we've kind of hit on there is this is very similar to archaeology, isn't it? Because it's this kind of it's this like faux realism of it's, you know, it's the same with like history versus historiography. Like people in the weeds of it will get that this is a very interpretive thing, but people more in like the pop history or pop archaeology sense of it will take like more non-critically that this is the thing, right? And so there's these kind of competing visions of how much where are the lines between fabrication and reconstruction versus just taking something literally as this is the original presentation of something, this is how it's meant to be, which I think really links in with all the colonial and Orientalist stuff that Pyramids of Mars is addressing in that especially, you know, that very Victorian sense in the original story of imposing like these Western fantasies onto Egypt and all these confusions about what are we actually reconstructing here. And I think it's gross, but it's kind of delightful in a way how that's all like kind of been revived in a digital way with these senses of we're literally, I mean, Liz Sladen's dead, and I find it really ghastly to be like this AI is trying to improve how she looks by, I guess the way the technology works is like this gestalt of other women's faces that it's like identified as some sort of average, as that's what her face should be looking like. It's just, I think it's just really odd, interesting resonance with archaeology.
Yeah, DLSS 5 turned on for Sarah Jane.
Yeah.
I think what you described there and how it connects to imperialism and the Egyptological field and just imposing, I guess, creating an imaginary version of the past in order to relate it to your present and how you relate to, I guess, other bits of the world, other places. I think the connections there, they aren't just abstract or hypothetical. I think like the deeper you look into, I guess, the AI field and the whole tech bro kind of cathedral around that, I guess that the more literal it becomes, because I think the story of imperialism continues very much through to the present day and what we're seeing being constructed with, I guess, like that whole Palantir manifesto that Alex Karp kind of chat out like the other week, like this whole weird kind of thing about how I think these people kind of have this idea in their head that with the power of AI, I guess the mystique that their amazing superior technology and their efforts to create digital consciousness and digital slaves sort of has built for them. With this, they are, I guess, the telos of mankind, like the end point, the superior version of mankind that has a duty to subjugate, dominate the rest of the world, exterminate people at will, you know, make the world into a sewer of blood, basically, so they can have like a nice little paradise in their bunker or whatever. And I think, it's linked all the way through. Like that's a continuation of the old imperialism. And in doing that and in kind of, I guess, creating these fake versions of everything, I guess, in them, just blanketing like media, art and stuff in this layer of just pure abstraction, I guess, creating just like a completely sort of fake version of all of that that's completely divorced from any material reality. I suppose that is part of the same process. Like it's just sort of subsuming everything into that technological hype. That same one that is bent on creating the new idealized, perfect technological utopia, based on total brute force and subjugation. And yeah, I guess in just absorbing everything into that, it functions on both like a cultural level, like with, I guess AI TV reconstructions and stuff, and on a level of actual force and like material force, like using AI to find people to drop airstrikes on and shit like that. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but like it does all feel like a part of one very big process.
No, I think there's a lineage here with, bear with me. Earlier this week on Twitter, I saw, you might have seen, Richard Dawkins was in some sort of love affair with the Claude AI that he's inputting like some of a book he's writing into it, and he's absolutely reeling with the intelligence of Claude, and he's doing all this sort of, it's that reverse hysteria the AI guys do where they act scared of it to like promote it. Although I don't know what sort of monetary connections or not. Maybe he just really is taken by it. I don't know. But it's kind of the fear thing which makes it actually seem really impressive and cool. But Dawkins, of course, as I'm sure, like in our adolescence and childhood, even he was such a figurehead of like the that kind of new atheism, very science heavy, rational focus. And I was never much into him, but you brought up in a religious way. The appeal of kind of some of that I was never into it, but the appeal of it made some sense to me because it is kind of a thing where the triumph of rationality over magic basically is certainly a kind of bigoted magic. That is this is my opinion.
Yeah, he was huge with millennial gifted kids. I think it was a big thing.
Yes, yeah. That's where I'm getting. And this story, of course, Pyramids of Mars, we were, in our original discussion, both of us, we were very taken, maybe even a little emotional about how great the triumph of materialism and science over magic and gods was in this story. It's really inspiring in Pyramids of Mars how that works, which is why I find such a fascinating flip here into what you were talking about with like the AI bro thing, where I think we've actually completely reversed the magic versus science thing here, where we've actually now got like these AI bros or ostensible science guys are on the side of the magic, where so much of the hawking of it is either eliding the way the technology works, or it's by like these fools that don't actually understand how the technology they're hawking works. And on the other side, like the rational people are like the Luddite equivalents where, they're saying, well, that's not how it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's not actually reading your book. It doesn't actually access like all 80 pages of the PDF that you put into it. It's like, if you've worked with these things long enough, you'll see the way they work. And it ain't doing that. And that Husk guy who blows up on like social media now, where he's constantly showing like the AIs are completely misunderstanding everything visually and verbally that is doing. Do you get what I mean with like we've flipped the dynamic in Pyramids of Mars, where we have obviously the Doctor science versus like the god obsessed like magician types, but here we have like the techno guys are in the magic and the like kind of Luddite equivalents are in the science stance, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is somewhat prefigured by how figures like Dawkins and maybe others of that sort of new atheist stripe, at some point during the 2010s or ish, thereabouts, they kind of had this bit of a transition where they went from being very hardline atheists, all religion is bad, religion is the root of all evil, into, well, I'm atheist, but I'm culturally Christian. Because, what they were actually talking about was how, in a very real sense, this kind of clash of civilizations, racist view of the world was actually a big driver behind a lot of their politics and worldview, rather than actual adherence to strict rationality. I mean, in general, the people who go on and on and on about how rational they are and how their politics are dictated by rationalism tend to be some of the most unhinged motherfuckers you'll ever meet, I think, and they believe some of the most insane shit, because I think they don't want to actually confront what their politics are. They don't want to put a name on their actual politics. They just go, well, my beliefs are whatever is rational, because I'm the most rational person. Everything I believe is very, very rational. So you can kind of count on them to start insane cults like the Zizians and stuff, and and Roko's Basilisk and all that stuff. That's why it all comes from them, because they are unhinged. And I think what it reveals is that it was never really about rationality in the first place. Even though they may have demonstrated rationality on various occasions, it is very much these underlying delusions and bigotries and paranoias and superstitions that they nursed throughout their careers or their lives, that nonetheless, as much push them into various forms of racism and stuff, as they do push them into this, like you say, like religious almost worship of this abstract, like AI ghost in the machine, like this very much non-existent AI kind of an angel that speaks to them and loves them and really displayed such a nuanced understanding of Richard Dawkins' book or whatever. And very much like it mirrors them in a lot of ways, like presumably Claude or whatever found keywords and phrases in Dawkins' PDF and said, hey, this is like this, and well, no shit, and Dawkins was like, oh my god, you understood it perfectly, because it can literally just identify, pinpoint, connect phrases and sentences and whatever. Like, in a very real sense, it's like it's the parrot that kind of just mirrors, regurgitates whatever you said back at you. And if you happen to be like narcissistic and really gullible and stupid, then maybe you'll think, oh my god, this thing understands me so well, it's a fucking genius. But it is, well, I don't want to be mean, but I think maybe there is like maybe the religious parallel is very like explicit. Like I think you could say a lot of people who claim maybe that they're like people who've started cults and claim to be prophets and stuff, like saying that they're getting messages from God, like God is telling them to drink the Kool-Aid or whatever. Like maybe there's something similar going on there. Like what is actually a message from their own head is being interpreted by them as, you know, a divine thing, like this very real, like an important thing from somewhere else. And so it is very true that the supposed side of science has sort of flipped, in these cases at least, into like this full-throated worship of like the abstract and the intangible, the seemingly divine. But that comes, I think, from like it feels like I think it's like political in nature. Like it comes from where they're positioned in terms of their class identity, their cultural identity. Like it's about where they are in this whole supposed clash of civilizations and this push for technological supremacy. I think that kind of like orients them to be like these AI worshippers or whatever, to take all this stuff very, very seriously and to believe all the bullshit and snake oil that the tech industry tries to sell them.
Yeah, well said. I think there's another interesting inversion I find in this like AIing of Pyramids of Mars, and actually season 13 in general is a better way to put it, because the Hinchcliffe era of Doctor Who was a very Gothic era of Doctor Who. And, you know, Gothic fiction, it's not just about, you know, the aesthetic of it or the supernatural element of it or the fear element of it. It's very much about the haunting element of it, the presence of the past in the story, you know, is what Gothic fiction is really about. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Pyramids of Mars very much has this because it's drawing the past. You know, we do the fun Doctor Who take on it with, you know, the servitor mummies and things like that. But it is keying back into, you know, this ancient history of the sirens, and, you know, the presence of the past is a key thing in the story. Even though it flits with like the alternate future stuff, it's quite a Gothic story at the base of it, just as so much of that great era of Doctor Who was. But I think we've got this interesting kind of flip on that when we look at like what's been done to season 13 here. And Pyramids of the Mars got off better than a lot of the other stories on this Blu-ray set. But it's like, now that we're like Liz Sladen is dead, and like we're mapping on, you know, this amalgamation of other women's faces, like kind of onto her is how the technology works. And so it's like, if Gothic is about the past refusing to stay buried, I feel like these reinventions of the stories are like this odd, it's almost like a haunting of the future. We're like re-injecting back into the past. Like we're constantly trying to tweak the past into becoming like our ideological perceptions of the future, like we're talking about with this whole AI bro thing. It's like we're not letting the mummy stay in the tomb. We're kind of tomb raiding the actual story, and we're trying to like reinvent it with all these modern, very flawed kind of visions of how things should be working now. I think it maps onto the like kind of colonial thing like we talked about at the start, but am I making any sense where this is kind of an interesting flip on the Gothic sense of it as well? Yeah, there's a tension between it, I guess, because on one hand it is very much like disinterring something from the past, but in the other sense, we're literally replacing like the video footage with this, you know, again, like abstracted kind of amalgamation of other stuff. So we're almost trying to rebury it at the same time as we lift it from the tomb. Like we're taking out the tomb, and then we're smothering it, lathering it in all this other stuff to cover up what's physically there. I guess you could say it's like, I don't know, like presenting like a corpse on display by covering it in makeup and putting a mask on it or something like that. It is this weird, like it is very Gothic, but in this like twisted way where it's kind of going both directions. Like we're trying to sort of subsume the past within something else, even though we cannot let go of it. So in a way, like you could say that the original is haunting these sort of AI versions, but equally it's like I guess the AI versions are doing their best to try and like, I guess it's the act of trying to cover up the imperfections in this videotape footage or whatever that enhance the degree to which that implicitness that the original is kind of haunting them. Like the harder you try to kind of cover them up with like DLSS5 kind of like yassification filter, you know, the more pressing like what you're doing becomes. Like the more clear it becomes that something is behind all of this, you know, that there is the more uncanny it becomes, the more insistent it gets. I guess that is every Gothic story, isn't it? Like you're trying to repress the past in a way. It's the past that refuses to be repressed. Yeah. I feel like we've had quite a few of these AI conversations lately, and I think this one was relevant, but they're much like a Yorkshire pudding, and there's something we shouldn't be doing all the time.
Yeah.
but but yeah, I just think this was it was a fascinating kind of update, because we ended that first discussion on the hope that there will be interesting like reinventions of it. So I think it's very interesting there kind of was rather soon a kind of negative reinvention, but it's a fascinating one nonetheless.
Yeah, it's with the collection sets, like for the longest time, like they were coming out and they were, I guess, received pretty uncontroversially. Like, okay, these are cool definitive releases of these stories. And now, because of this direction that the restoration team has gone in, like, it seems like, I mean, I feel like this direction is going to probably continue, like, with the future sets. So it's really, I mean, I guess I've already raised this in one of our other discussions, but it's interesting to see there's going to be a discrete point, like a break point in history at which we get, like, I guess it's because, like I was saying at the start of this little tidbit, because restoration is always kind of partly in places involved editing a little bit, or like editorializing, filling in blanks, kind of maybe painting over the imperfections. I guess it's like this almost imperceptible line, but very much a line that you cross, where you go from doing that a little bit to just to doing it a lot and just saying, okay, well, if we can replace a little bit, then we can replace all of it. You know, and you know, the illusion of fidelity completely just subsumes the material, the concept of actual fidelity, or trying to make an effort. Yeah, it's kind of a disappointing thing, but I suppose it's I mean, it's a sign of the times. It's a sign of where we are, and I guess that what the thing to look out for is how people respond to it, and whether people try and claim that this really is like the future. You know, this is the future, as RTD, I think, once said on the cover of Doctor Who magazine. Like, is this actually, is this guaranteed where, because this idea that, I think you alluded to this idea that something that's newer must be better. The idea that history only goes in one direction. I think that, again, is related to, I guess, all the concepts around, like, Egyptology and stuff, and the idea of, like, ancient, backwards, primitive civilizations and things like that, with their dark curses and things like that. And it's just, you got to be wary and make sure you don't continue that into the present day, you know? Like, what we have now is not necessarily the best. You know, things can change direction. So, yeah, always keep an eye on that.
I think something I love with the little controversy that perked up with the release of that Blu-ray in 2025 is, I love that, you know, we both like to talk a lot, obviously, and lots of fans like to talk a lot in lots of other directions, and it's sophistry is the word, isn't it? It's all this talk, and you can kind of talk your way around anything, and you can, I think a lot of the time, who knows what we actually believe, or who knows whoever we're arguing we believe. It's just words upon words upon words upon words, and I find something so cathartic and vindicating and fascinating, whether it resonates with me or not, where something happens where it kind of cuts through it, and there is a clear, like, actually this thing looks good and actually this thing looks bad. Like, sometimes it's with a story that, you know, we have an almost universal rejection of. And sometimes it's like, you know, some of the pro AI people will be saying they've always used AI on everything ever, or even, like, I'm not totally mocking that. Yes, they've used whatever you want to call it on sets beforehand, you know, to different degrees, but no one cared at a large scale until this season 13 release. So I just find it really fascinating that there is a line somewhere where something starts to look bad enough to a large enough group of people that they'll, like, raise some uproar about it. And it just fascinates me that, like, how far could they have pushed it before this would have happened? Or is it due to this is a really beloved season? Like, if it was on a crappier season, would people have reacted less to the... I think it's interesting that just behind all the talk and, like, the smoke and mirrors, there is a line somewhere where people start noticing kind of this, I'm not saying the O word here, but kind of this firm line of, wait, that is actually bad. We can kind of mostly agree. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that question of how far can the line be pushed, I think, is sort of the pivotal one of this whole AI age, I think. Because I think that the hope, certainly of the people selling and buying this technology, is that if they can boil the frog in terms of the quality of everything and just make everything a little bit shitter a little bit at a time, so everyone just gets used to it and just kind of accepts everything looking kind of crap forever, then they can just sort of get away with it, and they can, you know, make the hypothetical huge savings that they can make by, you know, firing loads of people and replacing it with sort of crap chatbots and stuff. They're hoping that will work. And the only thing that can stop that, I guess, is if people do actually still have standards and say, well, no, this is bad. Like, I won't be psyoped into claiming this shit's better.
All right, that well and truly wraps us up for Pyramids of Mars, unless there's some new, even stranger a reinvention of it sometime in the future. But for now, that certainly wraps us up on Pyramids of Mars. What do you think of Pyramids of Mars? Both any and all versions of the story, the novel, Tales of the TARDIS, the AI upscaled one, the DVD release, the iPlayer release, however you saw it. What do you think of the story and what Gig, myself, and Tyler had to say about it? Please let us know, and thank you very much for listening. Cheers.